Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first call came at 11:42 p.m. I remember because I had just glanced at the clock, wondering if I should go to bed or watch one more episode of the crime drama I'd been binging. The shrill ring of my phone made me jump, scattering popcorn across my lap. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? My voice sounded small in the quiet of my apartment. Silence. Then a low, raspy breath. Hello? I repeated, irritation creeping into my tone. Who is this? The line went dead. I stared at my phone, shrugged, and tossed it aside. Probably a wrong number or a prank call. I settled back into my show, pushing the odd call out of my mind. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again, same unknown number. This time I let it go to voicemail. A minute passed, and my phone buzzed with a notification. One new voicemail. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. That same raspy breathing filled the line for a few seconds. Then a whisper. I can see you. A chill ran down my spine. I deleted the message and blocked the number, my hands shaking slightly. Just a creep, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. I got up to make some tea, hoping it would calm my nerves. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I found myself peeking out the window, scanning the dark street below. Nothing but parked cars and empty sidewalks. Back on the couch, clutching my mug of chamomile, I tried to focus on my show, but my mind kept wandering, replaying that whispered message. I can see you. My phone buzzed. A text from another unknown number. Nice pajamas? I looked down at my faded Star Wars pajama pants and felt my stomach drop. How could they know? I jumped up and ran to each window, yanking the curtains closed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath. I'm getting threatening calls and messages from someone who says they can see me. I think I'm being watched. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. Are you in immediate danger? Do you see anyone around your property? No, I don't think so. I don't see anyone, but... Ma'am, while this is certainly unsettling, we can't send officers unless there's an immediate threat. Have you blocked the number? Yes, but they're using different numbers now. I understand. Keep your doors and windows locked, and if you see anyone suspicious or feel you're in danger, call us back immediately. I hung up, feeling frustrated and scared. They weren't going to help me. My phone rang again. Another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Stop calling me, I said, trying to sound firm and unafraid. A low chuckle. But we're just getting started, Sarah. My blood ran cold. They knew my name. Who is this? What do you want? I demanded. I want you to look out your window, Sarah. I have a surprise for you. The line went dead. Every instinct screamed at me not to do it, but I found myself moving towards the window. My hands shook as I reached for the curtain. I took a deep breath and pulled it back just an inch. At first I saw nothing. Then a movement caught my eye. A figure stood on the sidewalk across the street, partially hidden by a tree. They were looking right at my window. I let the curtain fall back and stumbled away from the window, my heart racing. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a coincidence, right? Just some random person standing on the street. My phone buzzed with a new text. I told you I could see you. Panic gripped me. I ran to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I pushed my dresser in front of it for good measure, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. Huddled on my bed, I called 911 again. There's someone outside my apartment, I said, my voice shaking. They've been calling and texting me, and now they're outside. Please, I need help. We'll send a patrol car to check it out. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. I hung up and waited, every muscle in my body tense. The minutes crawled by like hours. Every small sound made me flinch. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of my bedside clock, the rustle of leaves outside my window. My window. I hadn't closed the bedroom curtains. I looked up slowly, dreading what I might see. The glass reflected my pale, terrified face back at me. Beyond that, the dark night sky, a few visible stars, the silhouettes of trees, and a face pressed against the glass, grinning. I screamed, scrambling backwards off the bed. I hit the floor hard, tangled in my blanket. The face disappeared from the window. Sobbing, I crawled to the corner of the room as far from the window as I could get. I could hear my phone ringing in the living room, but there was no way I was leaving this room. A sharp knock on my bedroom door made me yelp. "Sarah? This is Officer Martinez with the police department. Are you all right?" Relief washed over me. Yes, I'm here," I called out, my voice hoarse. I shoved the dresser away from the door with shaking arms and unlocked it. 2 police officers stood in my hallway looking concerned. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" Officer Martinez asked. I shook my head. "No, but there was someone at my window, right there." I pointed, but the window showed nothing but darkness now. The officers did a thorough check of my apartment and the surrounding area. They found no signs of an intruder, no footprints beneath my window. "Your fire escape is secure, and there's no way someone could have climbed up to this window without equipment," Officer Chen said. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded vigorously. "I'm sure. He was right there looking in at me. And the calls, the texts. Look." I showed them my phone, but the messages from the unknown numbers were gone. Deleted somehow. The officers exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Ms. Carter, is there someone who could stay with you tonight? A friend or family member?" Officer Martinez asked gently. I shook my head. "My family's out of state and my friends all live across town." "All right, we'll have a car patrol the area for the rest of the night. Try to get some rest, and don't hesitate to call if anything else happens." After they left, I double-checked every lock, every window. I turned on all the lights and played loud music to drown out any sounds that might freak me out. There was no way I was sleeping tonight. I paced my living room, jumping at every car that drove by, every gust of wind that rattled the windows. My phone remained silent. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I finally started to relax. I'd made it through the night. Maybe it had all been some vivid, stress-induced hallucination. Maybe. My phone buzzed. New text message. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "Good morning, Sarah. Did you miss me? Don't worry, I'll see you again soon. Sweet dreams." Attached was a photo of me, asleep on my couch, clearly taken from inside my apartment. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. This wasn't possible. The police had checked everything. I'd been awake all night. But as the terror rose in my throat, threatening to choke me, my eyes landed on the TV remote next to me. The Blu-ray player was on, the menu screen of my show playing on a loop. Slowly, the realization dawned on me. I hadn't been binging a new show last night. I'd been watching my own life, recorded and played back to me. How long had they been watching? How did they get in? And most terrifying of all, were they still here? As if in answer, I heard a creak from inside my walls, a sound I'd always dismissed as old pipes or settling foundations. Now I knew better. My phone buzzed again. Trembling, I looked at the screen. Ready for the next episode? The headlights barely cut through the torrential downpour as I navigated the winding country road. It was well past midnight, and I was exhausted from hours of driving. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the roadside, thumb outstretched, drenched to the bone. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. Little did I know this decision would plunge me into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. I pulled over, the wipers struggling to keep up with the relentless rain. The man jogged to my passenger side, and I leaned over to unlock the door. He slid in, bringing with him the smell of wet clothes and something else I couldn't quite place. "Thanks, mate," he said, pushing back his soaked hood. "Thought I'd be out here all night." I nodded, pulling back onto the road. "No problem. Where you headed?" "Next town over, if that's all right," he replied, his voice oddly calm for someone who'd been stranded in such awful weather. I glanced at him. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-20s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to reflect the dim light of the dashboard. "I'm Jake," I offered, hoping some conversation would keep me alert for the drive. "Matt," he replied simply. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the rhythm of the rain and the swish of the wipers the only sounds. I tried to focus on the road, but my eyes kept darting to my unexpected passenger. There was something off about him, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "So, what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. Matt shrugged. "Sometimes you just need to get away, you know?" I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Who chooses to hitchhike in the middle of a storm? "What about you?" he asked. "Long drive?" "Yeah, coming back from a business trip. Should have gotten a hotel for the night, but I wanted to get home." Matt hummed in response, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The rain seemed to be getting heavier, if that was even possible. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Crazy weather, huh?" I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. No response. I glanced over at Matt, and my heart nearly stopped. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the wet road. I looked around wildly, half expecting to see Matt somehow in the back seat. But the car was empty except for me. My mind raced. Had I imagined him? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated an entire conversation? But no, the seat was wet where he'd been sitting. The musty smell of his damp clothes still lingered in the air. With shaking hands, I put the car in park and turned on the interior lights. I searched the car, looking under the seats, even popping the trunk, though I knew it was impossible for him to have gotten there. Nothing. No trace of Matt. I got back in the car, my clothes now soaked from the rain, and sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way he could have jumped out. We'd been going at least 50 miles per hour, and I would have noticed the door opening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe I had dozed off for a second and dreamed the whole thing. Sleep deprivation could do strange things to a person's mind, right? But as I went to put the car back in drive, something caught my eye. There on the dashboard was a small puddle of water, and next to it, unmistakably, was a muddy fingerprint. A chill ran down my spine. This was real. Matt had been here, and now he was gone. I put the car in drive and pressed the gas pedal to the floor, desperate to put as much distance between me and the stretch of road as possible. My mind whirled with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow seemed to move. Every reflection in the rearview mirror made me jump. I found myself checking the back seat obsessively, half expecting to see Matt's face grinning back at me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw lights ahead. A gas station. I pulled in, the bright fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the dark, wet night. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? Finally, I worked up the courage to go inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, making me jump. The clerk, an older man with a scraggly beard, looked up from his magazine. "Nasty night to be out," he commented. I nodded, trying to appear calm. "Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. Hey, this might sound crazy, but have you seen anyone else come through here tonight? A young guy, maybe mid-20s? The clerk furrowed his brow. "Can't say that I have. You're the first customer I've had in hours. Everything okay?" I hesitated. Should I tell him? Would he think I was crazy? I picked up a hitchhiker a few miles back, I started, the words tumbling out. And then he just disappeared. From inside my moving car. I expected the clerk to laugh, to tell me I must be tired and seeing things. Instead, his face paled. "You picked him up on Blackwood Road?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. The clerk sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "You're not the first, you know. It's been happening for years. Always on rainy nights, always on that stretch of road." What are you talking about?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "There was an accident about 10 years back," the clerk said, his eyes distant. "Young guy, hitchhiking in a storm. Driver didn't see him until it was too late. Hit him head on. They say he died instantly." I felt the blood drain from my face. But I talked to him. He was in my car." The clerk nodded solemnly. "They all say that. Sometimes he talks, sometimes he doesn't, but he always disappears." I stumbled back, gripping the counter for support. This couldn't be real. Ghosts weren't real. I was tired, that's all. I was seeing things. "Look, son," the clerk said, his voice gentle. "Why don't you sit down for a bit? I've got some coffee in the back. You look like you could use it." I nodded numbly, following him to a small break room. He poured me a cup of coffee, the aroma helping to ground me somewhat. What? What do I do now? I asked, my voice shaking. The clerk shrugged. Not much you can do. He's never hurt anyone, far as I know. Just gives them a good scare. My advice? Get some rest and try to put it behind you. But as I sat there sipping the too-hot coffee, I knew I'd never be able to forget. The image of Matt, his eyes reflecting the dashboard lights, was burned into my memory. After a while, I thanked the clerk and headed back to my car. The rain had finally let up, and a full moon peeked through the breaking clouds. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for the rest of the drive home. As I reached for the door handle, I froze. There in the back seat was a shape. A human shape. My heart pounded as I leaned in for a closer look. It was my jacket. The jacket I could have sworn I'd left at home. I laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. My imagination was really getting the best of me. I got in the car, shaking my head at my own foolishness. As I went to start the engine, my eyes caught something in the rearview mirror. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw Matt's face, his eyes meeting mine in the reflection. But when I whipped around to look, the back seat was empty. I peeled out of the gas station, my tires squealing on the wet pavement. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every shadow on the road looked like a person. Every reflection in my mirrors made me flinch. I made it home in record time, my hands shaking as I unlocked my front door. I left the lights off, not wanting to see if anything or anyone had followed me home. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about Matt. Was he out there now, thumb outstretched on that lonely stretch of road? How many other unsuspecting drivers would pick him up, only to be left shaken and questioning their sanity? One thing was certain. I'd never pick up another hitchhiker again. And on rainy nights, I'd be sure to avoid Blackwood Road, because now I knew the truth. Sometimes the ghosts of the past don't stay in the past. Sometimes they hitch a ride into the present, leaving us to grapple with a reality we're not prepared to face. The moment I answered that call, I knew this night shift would be different. Her voice, trembling and desperate, shattered the monotonous silence of the empty office building. "Please," she whispered, "you have to help me. I'm trapped somewhere inside." Little did I know those words would plunge me into a nightmare that would make me question everything I thought I knew about this place I'd guarded for years. I've been a night security guard at Oakwood Tower for the better part of a decade. 12 floors of polished corporate emptiness, my domain from dusk till dawn. I know every creaky floorboard, every flickering light, every shadow that stretches across the silent hallways, or at least I thought I did. That night started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., relieved the day shift guy, and settled into my usual routine. A quick patrol of the building, then back to the security desk to watch the cameras and catch up on some reading. The place was dead quiet, as always. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ping of the elevator to keep me company. It was around midnight when the call came in. I was halfway through a dog-eared paperback when the phone on my desk rang, startling me out of my book-induced trance. Probably a false alarm, I thought. Or maybe one of the cleaning staff had forgotten their access card again. I picked up the receiver. "Oakwood Tower Security, this is Mike." At first there was nothing but static. Then a woman's voice, so faint I had to press the phone hard against my ear to hear her. "Please," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "You have to help me. I'm trapped somewhere inside." I sat up straighter, my heart rate picking up. "Ma'am, where are you exactly? What floor?" I don't know," she replied, panic evident in her voice. "It's dark. I can't see anything. Please, you have to find me." "Okay, stay calm," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I'm going to come look for you. Can you tell me anything about where you are? Any sounds or smells?" "It's cold," she said. And I think I hear water dripping. Please hurry." The line went dead. I stood up, my mind racing. This had to be some kind of prank, right? The building was empty when I did my initial sweep. All the doors were locked, all the alarms set. There was no way someone could be trapped inside. But what if they were? I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed for the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal. My face looked pale, my eyes wide. Get it together, Mike, I told myself. You've dealt with weird stuff before. This is probably nothing. I decided to start at the top and work my way down. The 12th floor was executive offices, all glass walls and modern furniture. My footsteps echoed loudly as I walked the perimeter, shining my flashlight into every corner. Nothing. The 11th floor was much the same, and the 10th, and the 9th. With each empty floor, I felt a mix of relief and growing unease. Where was this woman? How had she gotten in? As I stepped off the elevator onto the 8th floor, something felt different. The air was cooler here, almost damp. I shone my flashlight down the hallway and the beam caught something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Wet footprints on the carpet leading away from the elevator. I followed them slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. They led to a door at the end of the hall, a supply closet if I remembered correctly. I put my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but cleaning supplies and a mop bucket. No woman, no sign of anyone. I let out a shaky breath, half relieved and half frustrated. What was going on here? That's when I heard it. Footsteps coming from somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No response. Just more footsteps, fading away now. I ran after the sound, turning a corner just in time to see a shadow disappear into the stairwell. "Hey!" I shouted, sprinting to the door. I yanked it open and looked down the stairs, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the echo of my own heavy breathing. I keyed my radio. "Control, this is Mike. I've got a possible intruder in the building, requesting backup." Static was my only reply. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was truly alone here. Whatever was happening, I had to handle it myself. I made my way back to the elevator, my nerves on high alert. As the door slid shut, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I turned just in time to see a figure dart past the closing gap. A woman, her long dark hair obscuring her face. My heart leapt into my throat. The doors were already closed. I jabbed the button for the 7th floor, willing the elevator to move faster. When it finally opened, I burst out, looking wildly in both directions. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" A soft sob echoed from somewhere down the hall. I ran towards the sound, my flashlight beam bouncing erratically off the walls. I rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. There she was, a woman in a white dress, her back to me, her long dark hair hanging limply down her back. She was facing the wall, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Ma'am," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right? I'm here to help you." She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. I took a step closer. "Miss, can you hear me?" Slowly, so slowly, she began to turn around. I felt my chest tighten, a sense of dread washing over me. Something was wrong, very wrong. As she fully faced me, I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. Where her face should have been, there was nothing but a swirling black void. I ran, faster than I've ever run in my life. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps unnaturally fast, a high-pitched wail filling the air. I slammed into the stairwell door, practically falling down the stairs in my haste to get away. I burst out onto the ground floor, gasping for air. The lobby was dark, the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the marble floor. I ran for the front doors, fumbling with my keys. Just as I got the door open, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around, coming face to face with the void where her features should be. "Help me," she whispered, her voice now a horrible rasping sound. "You have to help me." I wrenched myself free and stumbled out into the street, not stopping until I was several blocks away. I stood there, bent over and panting, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. When I finally worked up the courage to return to Oakwood Tower, everything was as I had left it. No footprints, no woman, no sign that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. I sat at my desk, shaken to my core, until the morning shift arrived. I didn't tell them what had happened. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. But as I left that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced up at the building, its windows reflecting the rising sun, and there, in a 7th-floor window, I saw her, just for a moment. A pale face, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. I quit my job that day, found a new gig across town. but I still dream about her sometimes. The woman in the white dress, the voice on the phone, and I wonder, is she still there? Still trapped? Still waiting for someone to answer her call? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but one thing's for sure. I'll never set foot in Oakwood Tower again. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some calls better left unanswered. Because sometimes when you go looking for someone who's trapped, you might just end up trapped yourself. The first set of footprints appeared on a Tuesday morning. Muddy and distinct, they led straight up to my cabin door, as if their owner had materialized out of thin air. I dismissed it as a late-night hiker, perhaps someone who'd lost their way. Little did I know, those innocent-looking tracks were the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very edge of sanity. I'd rented the cabin for a month-long writing retreat, desperate to finish my novel away from the distractions of city life. Nestled in the woods of Vermont, it seemed perfect, quaint, isolated, and blissfully quiet. The owner, a gruff old man named Earl, had handed me the keys with a grunt and a warning to keep the doors locked at night. "Bears," he'd said by way of explanation. I'd nodded, thinking nothing of it. That first week was productive. I'd wake early, make a pot of coffee, and write until the sun dipped below the tree line. The words flowed easily, inspired by the tranquil surroundings. But as the days wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started small. A book left on the coffee table when I was sure I'd put it back on the shelf. The creaking of floorboards in the middle of the night when I was certain I was alone. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, fueled by too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But then came the footprints. I stared at them that Tuesday morning, coffee mug in hand, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They started about 10 feet from the door, as if someone had dropped from the sky. No other tracks led to or from them. I shook my head, closed the door, and tried to focus on my writing. But the image of those muddy prints kept creeping into my mind, derailing my concentration. That night, I double-checked all the locks before bed. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams of shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. I woke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof, feeling groggy and unsettled. As I stumbled to the kitchen to start the coffee, something caught my eye. There, on the worn wooden floor, was a trail of wet footprints. My heart leapt into my throat. They led from the front door to the middle of the living room, then vanished. I ran to the door, my hands shaking as I checked the locks. They were still secure, deadbolt in place. How was this possible? I searched every inch of the cabin, looking for signs of forced entry, but found nothing. Unnerved, I called Earl. "Has anyone else got a key to this place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just me and you," he replied gruffly. "Why, something wrong?" I hesitated, then told him about the footprints. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Probably just some animal tracks you're seeing," he finally said, but there was an edge to his voice that made me uneasy. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I worried all day, unable to concentrate on my writing. As night fell, I found myself jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. The words, "just some animal tracks," kept repeating in my head, but I knew that was a lie. Those prints were unmistakably human. I barely slept that night, lying awake and listening intently for any sound out of place. Around 3 a.m. I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. My blood ran cold. I wanted to get up, to look out the window, but fear kept me paralyzed in bed. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, occasionally punctuated by a soft scraping sound against the outer walls. When my alarm finally went off at 7, sunlight streaming through the curtains, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I'd made it through the night. But as I walked into the living room, that relief evaporated instantly. There, scratched into the wooden floor, was a single word. Soon. I ran out of the cabin, not even bothering to change out of my pajamas. I needed to get to town, to talk to Earl face to face. This was beyond animal tracks or overactive imagination. Something was terribly wrong. Earl's shop was at the edge of town, a rundown general store that had seen better days. The bell jingled as I burst in, startling the old man behind the counter. "Whoa there," Earl said, eyeing my disheveled appearance. "What's got you in such a state?" Words tumbled out of me in a rush. The footprints, the noises, the scratched message. Earl's face grew more grave with each detail. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Thought maybe it had moved on." "What had moved on?" I demanded. "What's going on, Earl?" He looked at me for a long moment, then gestured for me to follow him into the back room. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, and settled into a worn armchair. "That cabin," he began, his voice low. "It ain't just a cabin. It's got a history." He told me a story that chilled me to the bone. Decades ago, a man had lived in that cabin. A recluse, odd but harmless, until the day they found the bodies. 3 hikers brutally murdered. The man vanished, never to be seen again. "Some say he died out there in the woods," Earl continued. "Others say, they say he's still out there, waiting." I downed my whiskey in one gulp, my mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, anger rising in my voice. Earl shrugged. "Didn't think you'd believe me, and it's been quiet for years now. Thought maybe it was over." I left Earl's shop in a daze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but another part, the writer in me perhaps, was morbidly curious. What if this was real? What if I could uncover the truth? I returned to the cabin, my senses on high alert. The scratched message was still there, mocking me. I spent the day researching the murders, finding old newspaper articles that corroborated Earl's story. As night fell, I found myself both dreading and anticipating what might come. I didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, the footsteps started again. This time, instead of hiding, I crept to the window. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the moonlight, tall and gaunt, with clothes hanging in tatters. It swayed slightly, as if in a breeze I couldn't feel. As I watched, frozen in terror, it turned its head towards the cabin, towards me. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination, anything but reality. A soft scratching at the door jolted me back to my senses. I looked around wildly for a weapon, finally grabbing a heavy table lamp. The scratching continued, growing more insistent. Then, silence. I stood there, lamp raised, for what felt like hours. Slowly, I approached the door. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. I don't know what compelled me to open it. Morbid curiosity? A desire to prove to myself that this was all in my head? Whatever the reason, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. Nothing. The porch was empty, the woods beyond still and silent. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish. Maybe Earl's story had gotten to me more than I thought. That's when I saw it. A new message, scratched into the wooden porch floor. "Welcome home." I didn't stop to pack, didn't stop to call Earl. I just ran. Ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, tires squealing as I peeled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of a figure emerging from the tree line, watching me go. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until I was back in the safety of my city apartment. I tried to tell myself it was all a bad dream, a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was in those woods. Something that had been waiting, for how long I couldn't say. And as I sat in my apartment, jumping at every sound, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished with me, that somehow, someday, it would find me again. After all, it had said, "Welcome home," and home, as they say, is where the heart is, even if that heart has long since stopped beating. The moment I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. What had started as an act of kindness on a rainy night was quickly turning into a nightmare. As we drove deeper into the unknown, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I had to get out of this car, no matter what it took. It was past midnight, and I'd been driving for hours. The rain had started as a light drizzle, but had turned into a relentless downpour, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. My windshield wipers were working overtime, and I was considering pulling over to wait out the storm when I saw him. He was standing on the side of the road, thumb out, completely drenched. In the split second it took me to decide, I thought about all the times I'd been stranded and wished someone would stop. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled over. As he jogged to the passenger side, I unlocked the door. He slid in, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite place. "Thanks, man," he said, pushing his wet hair out of his eyes. "I thought I'd be out here all night." "No problem," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "Where you headed?" "Just the next town over, if that's all right," he said, his voice oddly calm for someone who'd been standing in the pouring rain. I nodded, trying to focus on the road ahead. The rain wasn't letting up, and I had to squint to make out the yellow lines. "I'm Mark," I offered, hoping some conversation would help keep me alert. "John," he replied simply. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound. I kept sneaking glances at John, something about him setting me on edge. He was staring straight ahead, his face partially hidden in shadow. "So, what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. John shrugged. "Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, you know?" I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Who chooses to hitchhike in the middle of a storm? "What about you?" he asked. "Long drive?" "Yeah, coming back from visiting family. Should have gotten a hotel for the night, but I wanted to get home." John hummed in response, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. The rain seemed to be getting heavier, if that was even possible. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Crazy weather, huh?" I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Yeah," John replied, his voice low. "Perfect night for a drive, though. No one else on the road." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were. "So where exactly is this next town?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. John shifted in his seat. "Oh, not too far now. Just keep driving straight." I frowned. We'd been on this road for a while now, and I hadn't seen any signs for upcoming towns. In fact, I was starting to think we'd missed a turn somewhere. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't remember the next town being this far." John turned to look at me then, and in the dim light of the dashboard, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. There was a hardness there, a glint of something dangerous. I said, "Keep driving," he said. All pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. My heart started racing. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe I should just let you out here." Before I could finish, I felt something press against my side. I glanced down and saw the glint of a knife blade. "Keep driving," John said, each word punctuated with menace. My mouth went dry. I pressed down on the gas pedal, my mind racing. How had I gotten myself into this situation? What did he want? We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The rain continued to pour down, isolating us in a bubble of fear and uncertainty. "Turn right up here," John suddenly commanded. I looked ahead and saw a small dirt road leading off into darkness. My stomach dropped. There was no way this led to a town. "Please," I said, hating how my voice shook. "Just take my wallet, my phone, whatever you want. You don't have to do this." John laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, but I do. Now turn." With shaking hands, I turned onto the dirt road. The car bounced and slid in the mud, the headlights barely cutting through the darkness ahead. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. Could I crash the car? Jump out? But with the knife at my side, any sudden movement could be fatal. "Stop here," John said after we'd gone about a mile down the road. I brought the car to a stop, the engine idling. We were surrounded by dense forest on both sides, no signs of civilization in sight. "Get out," he ordered. "Please," I tried one last time. "You don't have to do this." The pressure of the knife increased. I said, "Get out." Slowly, I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. It was coming down in sheets now, soaking me to the bone in seconds. John got out on the other side, the knife still pointed at me. "Walk," he said, gesturing towards the woods. As I took my first step, a plan started to form in my mind. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was all I had. We walked for what felt like miles, the mud sucking at my shoes, branches whipping at my face. John stayed a few paces behind me, occasionally prodding me with the knife to keep moving. Finally, we came to a small clearing. John told me to stop. "Turn around," he said. This was it. My one chance. As I turned, I pretended to slip in the mud. I fell backwards, my arms flailing. In the split second of confusion, I kicked out hard, catching John in the knee. He yelled in pain and surprise, the knife falling from his hand. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I could hear John behind me, cursing and stumbling. I had no idea where I was going, just that I had to get away. The rain made it hard to see, hard to breathe, but I didn't stop. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the woods and onto a road. By some miracle, a car was approaching. I waved my arms frantically, probably looking like a madman. The car slowed, and I saw the concerned face of an elderly woman peering out at me. "Please," I gasped. "Help me." She must have seen the terror in my eyes because she unlocked the doors without hesitation. I climbed in, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the door. "Drive," I said. "Please, just drive." As we sped away, I looked back at the woods. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching us go. But then we turned a corner and it was gone. The woman, bless her, drove me straight to the police station. I gave my statement, still shaking, still soaked to the bone. They never found John. The woods were searched, but there was no trace of him. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever real, or if he was some manifestation of my worst fears brought to life by that dark, stormy night. But then I remember the cold press of the knife against my side, the glint in his eyes, and I know it was all too real. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it. And I never ever pick up hitchhikers. Some acts of kindness aren't worth the risk, because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the woods or under our beds. Sometimes they're sitting right next to us, waiting for their moment to strike. The first time I noticed something was off, it was my favorite coffee mug. I could have sworn I'd left it in the sink, but there it was, sitting on the kitchen counter, clean and dry. I brushed it off as forgetfulness, a side effect of my long hours at work. But as the days went by, more things started to feel wrong. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would turn my own home into a prison of fear and paranoia. I'd been living in this apartment for about 6 months. It was nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. The rent was cheap, and the landlord, Mr. Keegan, seemed nice enough. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a perpetual look of exhaustion on his face. At first, everything was normal. I'd come home from work, make dinner, maybe watch some TV and go to bed. But then things started to change. It was subtle at first. A book out of place here, a chair moved slightly there. I told myself I was just being absent-minded, too stressed from my job to remember where I put things. But then I started noticing bigger things. One day I came home to find my laptop open on the coffee table. I always shut it down and put it away before leaving for work. Another time I found wet footprints leading from the bathroom to the front door, footprints that were too big to be mine. I started to feel uneasy in my own home. I'd walk into a room and get the distinct feeling that someone had just been there. The air would feel different, somehow disturbed. I'd catch whiffs of unfamiliar cologne or hear the faintest echo of footsteps when I knew I was alone. I considered talking to Mr. Keegan about it, but what would I say? That I thought someone was sneaking into my apartment to move my things around? He'd think I was crazy. So I kept quiet and tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But then came the night that changed everything. I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding. Something had pulled me from sleep, but I couldn't pinpoint what. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m. As I lay there trying to calm my racing pulse, I heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard in the living room. I froze, barely daring to breathe. There it was again, closer this time. Someone was in my apartment. Panic gripped me. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, but my fingers froze over the keypad. What if they heard me? What if they came in here? The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow of feet in the gap beneath it. My whole body tensed, waiting for the handle to turn. But it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow moved away. I heard more creaks, then the soft click of the front door closing. I didn't move for hours, too terrified to even check if they were really gone. When the first light of dawn started to creep through my curtains, I finally found the courage to get up. The apartment looked normal. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. If it weren't for the lingering scent of that unfamiliar cologne, I might have convinced myself it was all a bad dream. I called in sick to work that day. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my apartment unattended. Instead, I went to the hardware store and bought new locks for my doors and windows. I installed them all myself, my hands shaking the entire time. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump. I kept imagining I heard footsteps, kept seeing shadows move out of the corner of my eye. The next day, exhausted and on edge, I decided I needed proof. I went out and bought a small security camera, the kind you can hide easily. I set it up in my living room, angled to capture most of the apartment. For days, nothing happened. The camera recorded hours of empty rooms and me going about my daily routine. I started to think that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, that stress and lack of sleep had made me paranoid. And then, a week after I installed the camera, it happened. I was at work when I got the notification on my phone that the camera had detected movement. With shaking hands, I opened the app and watched the live feed. There was someone in my apartment, a man, moving around my living room like he owned the place. As he turned towards the camera, I felt my blood run cold. It was Mr. Keegan. I watched in horror as he casually walked through my home, picking things up and examining them. He went into my bedroom, staying there for far too long. When he came out, he was carrying one of my sweaters. He held it to his face and inhaled deeply before putting it back. I felt sick. This couldn't be happening. How long had this been going on? How many times had he been in my home while I was away? While I was sleeping? I left work early, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Call the police? Move out immediately? When I got home, everything looked normal, just like always. But now I knew the truth. I could almost see the ghost of Mr. Keegan moving through my rooms, touching my things, invading my privacy. I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, showing her the video footage and explaining everything. She insisted we go to the police. The officers took my statement and watched the video. They seemed concerned, but warned me that since Mr. Keegan was the landlord and technically had the right to enter for maintenance, it might be hard to prove criminal intent. Still, they agreed to investigate. They interviewed Mr. Keegan, who apparently broke down and confessed almost immediately. He'd been doing this for years, he said, to multiple tenants. The police found evidence in his own apartment, photographs, stolen items, detailed journals of his intrusions. I never went back to that apartment. I couldn't bear the thought of being in that space, knowing what had happened there. Even after moving to a new place, it took months before I could relax in my own home again. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear footsteps outside my door. I have to remind myself that it's over, that I'm safe now. But a part of me wonders if I'll ever truly feel secure again. The experience taught me a harsh lesson about trust and privacy. We like to think of our homes as sanctuaries, as the one place where we can truly be ourselves. But the truth is, we're vulnerable even in our most private spaces. The locks on our doors can't always keep out the monsters, especially when the monster has a key. Now, I always check my security cameras before I go to bed. I have sensors on all my doors and windows. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it self-preservation. Because I know firsthand that sometimes the greatest threats aren't strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes they're the familiar faces we see every day, hiding sinister secrets behind friendly smiles. Mr. Keegan is in prison now, but I often wonder about his other victims. How many lives did he invade? How many people are out there, feeling uneasy in their own homes, not knowing why? And how many other Mr. Keegans are out there, holding keys to apartments, hiding behind the facade of helpful landlords? I don't have answers to these questions. All I know is that I'll never take my privacy for granted again, because once it's violated, you realize just how precious and fragile it really is, and no lock in the world can fully restore that sense of security once it's been shattered. The moment I opened that suitcase, I knew my life would never be the same. Stacks of crisp bills stared back at me, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But as the pounding on my motel room door grew louder, I realized that finding a fortune might just cost me everything. It had been a long day of driving. I was on my way to start a new job in a new city, leaving behind a failed relationship and a mountain of debt. The cheap motel on the outskirts of town wasn't much, but it was all I could afford for the night. I remember thinking how quiet the place was as I pulled into the parking lot. Just a few cars scattered here and there, their owners probably tucked away in their rooms for the night. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie red glow over the cracked asphalt. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I checked in. He slid a key across the counter, an actual metal key, not one of those electronic cards. It felt heavy in my hand, like it carried the weight of all the stories these walls had seen. Room 13, of course. I lugged my duffel bag up the creaky stairs, the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener assaulting my nose. The key stuck in the lock, and for a moment I thought I might be spending the night in the hallway. But with a final jiggle and a hard turn, the door swung open. The room was about what I expected: faded wallpaper, a sagging bed, and a TV that looked like it had been around since the 90s. But it was clean enough, and at that point all I wanted was a shower and some sleep. That's when I saw it. A suitcase, sitting innocuously by the window. For a second I thought maybe I'd walked into the wrong room. But no, this was definitely 13. I approached it cautiously, half expecting someone to jump out and yell that this was all some elaborate prank. The suitcase was old scuffed black leather with tarnished brass fittings. It looked like something out of a noir film. I should have called the front desk right then. Should have reported the mysterious luggage and asked for a different room. But curiosity got the better of me. I mean, how often do you find a strange suitcase in your motel room? The latches opened with a soft click. I held my breath as I lifted the lid. Money. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills neatly bound and filling the suitcase to the brim. My hands shook as I picked up one of the bundles. It felt real. It smelled real. This had to be millions of dollars. My mind raced. Where had this come from? Was it some kind of mistake? A drug deal gone wrong? I should close it, I thought. Close it and pretend I never saw it. Call the police, maybe. But then I thought about my maxed-out credit cards, the student loans hanging over my head, the crappy apartment waiting for me in the city, all I could afford on my new entry-level salary. Just as I was contemplating what this money could mean for my life, I noticed something else. A small envelope tucked into the lining of the suitcase. With trembling fingers, I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was brief and chilling. Delivered to 1029 Cypress Avenue. You have until 2 a.m. Do not contact anyone. We're watching. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 11:47 p.m. Just over 2 hours. My heart pounded in my chest. This was insane. I should call the cops right now. But something stopped me. Fear, sure, but also opportunity. I looked at the money again, my mind already calculating how much I could take without it being noticed. Just a little, I thought. Just enough to pay off my debts. They'd never know. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed the sound. A soft knock at first, then louder. Someone was at the door. I froze, the stolen bill still in my hand. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Housekeeping, a muffled voice called. Housekeeping? At midnight? No, thank you, I called back, my voice cracking. The knocking stopped, but I could sense someone still out there. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, dressed in a motel uniform that seemed a size too small. He was looking directly at the peephole, a slight smirk on his face. As I watched, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. A gun. I stumbled back from the door, my mind reeling. This was real, this was happening, I had to get out of here. But how? The only exit was the door, and there was an armed man on the other side. The window? I was on the second floor, but maybe... The decision was made for me as the doorknob began to turn. I hadn't even heard him picking the lock. In a panic, I grabbed the suitcase and ran to the window. It was old and swollen with humidity, but adrenaline gave me strength. It flew open with a screech just as I heard the door behind me slam open. I didn't think. I just jumped. The fall was both longer and shorter than I expected. I hit the ground hard, the suitcase tumbling from my grasp. Pain shot through my ankle, but I ignored it. I could hear shouts from above, the sound of running feet. I scooped up the suitcase and ran. My car was just a few spaces away. If I could just make it. A gunshot rang out, the bullet pinging off the pavement near my feet. I yelped and ran faster, my injured ankle screaming in protest. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. Another shot, this one shattering my rear window. I dove inside, jammed the key into the ignition, and peeled out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see two men running after me, but they quickly fell behind. I drove aimlessly, taking random turns, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. After about 20 minutes, when I was sure I wasn't being followed, I pulled into an empty parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. What had I done? What had I gotten myself into? I looked at the suitcase sitting on the passenger seat. In the heat of the moment, I'd grabbed it without thinking. Now I was stuck with it, and whatever trouble came with it. I checked my phone, 12:43 a.m., a little over an hour until the deadline. I had a choice to make. I could go to the police, tell them everything. Maybe they could protect me from whoever was after this money. Or I could make the delivery, hope that whoever was behind this would let me walk away. Or I looked at the suitcase again. I could run, take the money and disappear, start a new life somewhere far away. Each option seemed impossible, fraught with danger. But I had to decide. The clock was ticking, and I knew that somewhere out there someone was watching, waiting. With a deep breath, I started the car. Whatever I decided, I couldn't stay here. As I pulled back onto the road, the weight of the suitcase seemed to grow heavier. I'd wanted a fresh start, a new beginning. Well, I thought grimly, be careful what you wish for. The night stretched out before me, full of possibilities and dangers. And somewhere in this city was 1029 Cypress Avenue, a simple address that now held the key to my fate. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down on the gas. Whatever happened next, there was no going back now. The quiet life I'd known was over, all because of one night, one room, one mysterious suitcase. And as the city lights blurred past my windows, I couldn't help but wonder, when this night was over, would I be rich beyond my wildest dreams, in jail, or worse? Only time would tell. And time, I knew all too well, was quickly running out. The first crack of thunder made me jump, but it was the second sound, a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from the very walls of the old barn, that turned my blood to ice. I'd sought shelter from the storm, but as the shadows around me began to move in ways shadows shouldn't, I realized I'd walked straight into a nightmare. It had started as a simple camping trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and the stress of losing my job. Just me, my tent, and the great outdoors. I'd chosen a remote spot in the woods, miles from the nearest town, the perfect place to reconnect with nature and forget about my problems for a while. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The fresh air, the quiet, the simple routine of gathering firewood and cooking over an open flame. I felt more relaxed than I had in months. But on the third day, everything changed. I woke to dark clouds rolling in, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I should have packed up then, headed back to civilization. But I convinced myself it was just a passing shower. I could wait it out. By mid-afternoon, I knew I'd made a mistake. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees with a fury that bent branches and sent leaves swirling. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, quickly turning into a deluge that had me scrambling to secure my tent. It was a losing battle. Within minutes, my campsite was a soggy mess. I needed to find better shelter, and fast. That's when I remembered the old barn I'd passed on my hike the day before. It was about a mile away, but it was my best option. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed in what essentials I could, and set off through the worsening storm. By the time I reached the barn, I was soaked to the bone and shivering. The structure loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. It was larger than I remembered, and in the gloom of the storm, it looked far more ominous than it had in the sunshine. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly unsure. There was something off about the place, a stillness that seemed unnatural, even with the raging storm around it. Another crack of thunder made the decision for me. I ducked inside, grateful for the reprieve from the rain. The interior was dim, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the gaps in the wooden walls. The air was thick with the smell of damp hay and something else, something musty and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. I moved deeper into the barn, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. Old farm equipment cast strange shadows, and I could hear the scurrying of small animals in the corners, but overall it seemed dry and secure, a good place to wait out the storm. I found a relatively clean patch of hay and sat down, rummaging in my backpack for a dry shirt. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I'd imagined it at first. A whisper, like someone exhaling a long, slow breath. I froze, my hand still in my backpack. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the empty barn. "Is someone there?" No response, just the howling of the wind outside and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. I shook my head, laughing nervously at my own jumpiness. Of course no one was here. It was just an old empty barn in the middle of nowhere. I changed into my dry clothes and tried to get comfortable. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and I resigned myself to spending the night here. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being out in that downpour. As night fell, the darkness in the barn became absolute. My flashlight cast a weak beam that seemed to be swallowed up by the shadows. I kept it on, a small circle of light that did little to dispel the growing sense of unease that was settling over me. That's when the noises started. At first it was just creaks and groans, old wood settling, I told myself. But then came sounds I couldn't explain away so easily. Scratching noises from the walls, soft thuds from the hayloft above, and worst of all, that whispering sound again, closer now, like someone was standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I pulled my knees to my chest, my eyes darting around wildly. This wasn't right. I shouldn't be here. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, storm or no storm. But where would I go? I was miles from anywhere, in the middle of a forest I barely knew, in pitch darkness and pouring rain. A particularly loud thud from above made me yelp. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the hayloft. A dark shape, too big to be an animal, ducking out of sight. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "This isn't funny." That's when the whispering started again, but this time I could make out words. "Join us," it seemed to say, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Stay with us." I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be happening. I had to be dreaming or hallucinating or... A hand touched my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around and swinging my flashlight like a weapon. The beam caught something, a face pale and gaunt with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. It grinned at me, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just ran blindly toward where I thought the door was. I could hear movement all around me now, the rustling of hay and the creaking of floorboards as unseen things gave chase. I slammed into the barn door with enough force to knock the wind out of me, fumbling with the latch in panic. It wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Hands grabbed at me from behind, cold and strong. I thrashed and kicked, somehow breaking free. In desperation, I threw myself at one of the walls where I'd seen gaps in the planks. The old wood gave way with a splintering crack, and suddenly I was outside, rain lashing at my face. I didn't stop to see if I was being followed. I just ran, stumbling through the dark forest, branches whipping at my face and arms. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. The storm still raged around me, but it was preferable to what I'd left behind in that barn. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation sank in. I was lost in the woods, in the middle of a storm, with no supplies and no idea which way to go. But even that seemed better than going back. I started walking, picking a direction at random and hoping it would lead me to a road, a house, anything. As I trudged through the rain, my mind kept replaying what I'd seen in the barn. It couldn't have been real. Maybe I'd eaten some bad berries or hit my head, or... A distant sound made me stop in my tracks. Was that a car engine? Hope surged through me. I changed direction, moving as fast as I could toward the sound. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line onto a road. Headlights appeared in the distance. I waved my arms frantically, praying they'd see me. The car slowed, then stopped. An older couple peered out at me, concern evident on their faces. "Are you all right, son?" the man asked as I approached. I opened my mouth to explain, but how could I? How could I tell them about the horrors in the barn without sounding completely insane? I got lost," I managed to say. "Can you help me get to town?" They were kind enough to give me a ride. As we drove away, I kept looking back, half expecting to see pale faces and sharp-toothed grins in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing but darkness and rain. I never went camping again after that night. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear those whispers. "Join us," they say. "Stay with us." And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that somewhere out there in a forest I'll never visit again, there's an old barn waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to seek shelter from the storm. The moment I realized Sarah was gone, I felt like I'd been plunged into an icy lake. One second she was there, sitting next to me in the passenger seat, and the next, nothing. Just an empty space where a person should have been. It was as if the rainy night had reached into my car and swallowed her whole, leaving me alone with a mystery that would haunt me for years to come. It had been a long day at the office, the kind where the fluorescent lights seem to drain your soul and the clock on the wall mocks you with its slow ticking. I was the last one out, as usual, locking up just as the storm clouds rolled in. That's when I saw Sarah, huddled under the building's awning, clutching her jacket tight around her. I knew her vaguely. She worked in accounting 2 floors below me. We'd exchanged pleasantries in the elevator a few times, but that was about it. "Need a ride?" I called out, already feeling raindrops on my face. She looked relieved. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." I waved off her concern. "It's no trouble. Where do you live?" As it turned out, her apartment was on my way home. We dashed to my car, the rain already coming down in sheets. Once inside, I turned up the heat, noticing how she shivered slightly in her damp clothes. "Thanks again," she said, offering a small smile. "I usually take the bus, but with this weather—" "No problem," I replied, pulling out of the parking lot. "I'm Tom, by the way. I don't think we've ever properly introduced ourselves." "Sarah," she said, though I already knew her name. "Nice to finally meet you, Tom." We fell into easy conversation as I navigated the rain-slicked streets. Sarah was funny and quick-witted, and I found myself enjoying her company more than I expected. We talked about work, our weekend plans, the latest office gossip. It felt nice, normal. The rain was getting heavier, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, wipers working overtime. "This is crazy," I muttered. "I can barely see the road." "Maybe we should pull over?" Sarah suggested, a note of concern in her voice. I shook my head. "We're almost to your place, just a few more minutes." I glanced over at her, offering what I hoped was a reassuring smile. She smiled back, but there was tension around her eyes. That was the last time I saw her. I turned my attention back to the road, focusing on not hydroplaning in the deep puddles that were forming. The rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof filled the car. "So, any big plans this weekend?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. No response. "Sarah?" I turned to look at her again, and my heart nearly stopped. The passenger seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly before coming to a stop. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the vacant seat, trying to process what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. "Sarah," I called out again, louder this time. Maybe she'd somehow slipped into the back seat. But no, that was empty too. I got out of the car, rain immediately soaking through my clothes. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice barely audible over the storm. There was no sign of her anywhere. My mind raced. Had she jumped out of the car? But why? And how hadn't I noticed? The door hadn't opened. I would have felt the rush of wind and rain, and we'd been going at least 40 miles per hour. If she'd somehow fallen out, she'd be seriously injured. I walked up and down the street, calling her name, peering into the darkness. But there was nothing, just empty sidewalks and the relentless rain. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I got back in the car, shaking from both cold and shock. I sat there, water dripping from my hair, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I imagined her? No, that was impossible. We'd had a whole conversation. I could still smell her perfume in the car. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the drive. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd convinced myself that I must have dropped her off and somehow forgotten about it. Stress and fatigue can do strange things to a person's memory, right? But when I checked my phone, there were no messages from Sarah thanking me for the ride. And when I got to work on Monday, ready to apologize for my apparent lapse in memory, I was met with confused looks. "Sarah from accounting?" the receptionist said, frowning. "We don't have anyone by that name working here." I felt like I was losing my mind. I described Sarah, her dark hair, her green eyes, the little scar on her left hand, but no one seemed to know who I was talking about. I went down to the accounting department, thinking maybe there had been some misunderstanding. But as I walked through the office, I realized I didn't recognize anyone there. Faces I thought I knew suddenly seemed unfamiliar. "Can I help you?" a woman asked, noticing my confused wandering. "I'm looking for Sarah," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "She works here in accounting." The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry, there's no Sarah in this department. Are you sure you have the right floor?" I mumbled an apology and left, my head spinning. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. During my lunch break, I decided to do some digging. I searched the company directory, social media, even local news articles. There was no trace of Sarah anywhere. As the days turned into weeks, I became obsessed with finding her. I retraced our drive that night countless times, always in the rain, hoping to recreate the conditions. I put up flyers with her description, much to the concern of my coworkers who were starting to worry about my mental state. I even went to the police, but without a last name or any proof that Sarah had ever existed, they couldn't do much. The detective listened to my story with a mixture of skepticism and pity. "Look, Mr. Thompson," he said gently, "sometimes our minds play tricks on us, especially in stressful situations. Are you sure you didn't just imagine this woman?" But I knew I hadn't imagined her. The memory of our conversation was too vivid, too real. The way she laughed at my lame jokes, the slight crinkle around her eyes when she smiled. These weren't things you could invent. Months passed, and slowly life began to return to normal, or at least a new kind of normal. I still thought about Sarah every day, but the intensity of my search faded. I had to accept that I might never know what happened that rainy night. And then, exactly 1 year later, it happened again. I was driving home from work, another late night, another rainstorm. As I stopped at a red light, I glanced over at the passenger seat out of habit. My heart nearly stopped. Sarah was sitting there, looking exactly as she had that night a year ago. She turned to me, a sad smile on her face. "Hello, Tom," she said softly. "I'm sorry I disappeared on you like that." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stared at her, afraid that if I blinked, she'd vanish again. "I know you have questions," she continued, "but I can't answer them. I'm not even sure I understand it myself. All I know is that sometimes on rainy nights like this, I exist, and sometimes I don't." The light turned green, but I didn't move. Cars behind me started honking. "You have to let me go, Tom," Sarah said, her form already starting to fade. "For both our sakes. Just remember, not everything in this world can be explained. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved." And with that, she was gone. Again. I sat there, oblivious to the angry horns behind me, tears mixing with the rain on my face. Part of me wanted to start searching again, to prove to myself and everyone else that I wasn't crazy. But a larger part knew that Sarah was right. Some things can't be explained, can't be solved. As I finally drove home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The mystery of Sarah would always be a part of me, a reminder that the world is stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. And on rainy nights, I'd always keep an eye on my passenger seat, just in case. Because you never know when someone might appear or disappear right before your eyes. The moment I realized I wasn't alone in that park, every horror movie I'd ever watched flashed through my mind. The rhythmic sound of my feet hitting the pavement was joined by another set of footsteps, perfectly in sync with mine, but always just out of sight. As the shadows grew longer and my heart raced faster, I knew this late-night run was about to turn into a nightmare I might not escape. It had started as a normal Tuesday. Work was stressful as usual, and by the time I got home I was a bundle of nerves and pent-up energy. A run always helped clear my head, so I laced up my shoes and headed to Oakwood Park, just a few blocks from my apartment. The park was different at night. The familiar playground and picnic areas took on an eerie quality in the dim glow of the scattered streetlights. But I'd run here countless times before, and the solitude was part of the appeal. Just me, the sound of my breathing, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I started my usual route, a winding path that looped around the park's perimeter. The first lap was uneventful. I focused on my breathing, feeling the day's tension start to melt away with each step. By the second lap, I had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. That's when I first noticed it. A sound just on the edge of my hearing, almost imperceptible. At first, I thought it was just an echo of my own footsteps bouncing off the trees. But as I rounded a bend, I realized it was something else. Another set of footfalls, perfectly matching my pace. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another late-night runner. But the path behind me was empty. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the evening. I picked up my pace slightly, telling myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably just an animal in the underbrush, or maybe my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sound persisted, always behind me, always in perfect sync with my own steps. I tried varying my speed, even stopping abruptly at one point. Each time the phantom footsteps adjusted, maintaining that eerie synchronization. My heart was pounding now, and not just from the exertion. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The park that had always been my refuge suddenly felt like a trap. The trees that lined the path seemed to loom over me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I decided to cut my run short and head back to the park entrance. As I turned onto the main path, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape just ducking behind a tree. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet park. "Is someone there?" No response, just the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of leaves. I started walking briskly towards the exit, fighting the urge to break into a sprint. Running would make me look like prey, I thought. Better to stay calm and alert. The footsteps behind me quickened to match my new pace. They sounded closer now, no longer trying to hide their presence. I could hear the crunch of gravel, the soft thud of feet on grass. I couldn't help it. I ran. I sprinted down the path, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps behind me broke into a run as well, growing louder, closer. I chanced another look over my shoulder and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Tall, unnaturally thin, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. I pushed harder, my legs burning with the effort. The park entrance was just ahead, the streetlights of the main road a beacon of safety. Just a little further. Something caught my foot, and I went sprawling onto the path. Pain shot through my hands and knees as they scraped against the gravel. I scrambled to get up, certain that at any moment I would feel hands grabbing me, pulling me back into the darkness. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. No shadowy figure, no sound of footsteps. Just the empty path stretching back into the dimly lit park. I didn't wait to see if my pursuer would reappear. I limped as fast as I could to the park entrance, not stopping until I was under the bright lights of the main street. Only then did I pause to catch my breath, my hands on my knees as I gulped in air. A couple walking their dog gave me a concerned look as they passed. I must have been quite a sight. Sweaty, wide-eyed, with bloody palms and torn running clothes. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, taking a step towards me. I nodded, not trusting my voice just yet. They lingered for a moment, clearly unsure whether to believe me, before continuing on their way. As my breathing slowed and the adrenaline began to fade, I started to doubt myself. Had there really been someone following me? Or had I let my imagination run wild, turning normal nighttime park sounds into something sinister? I looked back at the park entrance. Everything seemed peaceful now. No shadowy figures, no phantom footsteps. Just a quiet, empty park at night. Shaking my head, I turned to walk home. I'd barely gone a block when I heard it again. Footsteps, matching my pace exactly, coming from just behind me. I whirled around, ready to confront whoever or whatever had been stalking me. But the sidewalk was empty. The sound stopped the moment I did. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the street. For just a split second, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow cast on the sidewalk beside me, a shadow that didn't match my own. I ran all the way home, not daring to look back again. I slammed my apartment door shut behind me, locking it with shaking hands. Only when I was safely inside did I allow myself to break down, sliding to the floor as sobs racked my body. What had happened in that park? Who or what had been following me? The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations: stress-induced hallucinations, an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night horror movies, maybe even some prankster getting their kicks by scaring runners. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations fit. What I had experienced was something else, something that didn't belong in the world as I understood it. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains in the breeze made me jump. I kept expecting to hear those footsteps outside my door, to see that impossibly tall, thin figure looming in my bedroom doorway. Morning came, and with it, a semblance of normalcy. In the harsh light of day, my experience in the park seemed almost laughable. I went to work, trying to push the memories of the previous night to the back of my mind. But as evening approached, I felt that familiar dread creeping back in. The thought of going home, of being alone in my apartment as darkness fell, was unbearable. I stayed late at the office long after everyone else had gone home. When I finally left, I took a taxi instead of walking, even though my apartment was only a few blocks away. As we drove past Oakwood Park, I found myself staring out the window, scanning the shadows between the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something. A flash of movement, a figure standing unnaturally still among the bushes. The taxi driver must have noticed my unease. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. I tore my gaze away from the park. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Everything's fine." But I knew it wasn't, because as we drove away, I could have sworn I saw that figure step out onto the path. And even though we were moving, even though it was impossible, I heard it. Footsteps, perfectly in sync with the motion of the car, following me home. I haven't been back to Oakwood Park since that night. I've changed my running route, sticking to well-lit streets and populated areas. But sometimes when I'm walking home late or lying awake in the dark, I hear it. That soft, steady rhythm of footsteps, always just out of sight. And I wonder, are they getting closer? The scratching at the window was so faint at first, I thought it was just the wind. But as the sound grew more insistent, a chill ran down my spine. I was miles from civilization, alone in a cabin I'd rented for a peaceful getaway. Yet something was out there in the darkness, trying to get in. And as I would soon discover, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the brink of sanity. I'd booked the cabin on a whim, desperate for an escape from the chaos of city life and the pressure of my high-stress job. The listing had promised seclusion and tranquility, nestled deep in the woods with no neighbors for miles. It sounded perfect. The drive up had been beautiful, winding through dense forests and alongside crystal-clear streams. As I pulled up to the cabin, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The place was charming, if a bit rustic. A small 2-story log structure with a wide porch and large windows overlooking the surrounding wilderness. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. I hiked the nearby trails, breathed in the crisp mountain air, and spent the evening curled up by the fireplace with a good book. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a distant bird or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. I'd gone to bed early, lulled by the peace and quiet. But sometime in the dead of night, I jolted awake, my heart pounding. For a moment, I couldn't pinpoint what had disturbed me. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I lay there, barely breathing, straining my ears. The footsteps completed a circuit around the house, then paused. A long moment of silence followed, broken suddenly by a sharp tap on my bedroom window. I nearly leapt out of my skin. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with explanations. It was probably just a branch blown by the wind or maybe some nocturnal animal. But as I listened, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Too rhythmic, too intentional to be anything but a person. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response. Just more tapping, growing more insistent. I reached for my phone, ready to call for help, only to remember with a sinking feeling that there was no cell service out here. The cabin had a landline for emergencies, but it was downstairs in the living room. Gathering my courage, I slipped out of bed and crept to the window. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtain just a crack. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then a movement caught my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the dim moonlight. As I watched, it raised a hand and waved slowly as if it knew I was looking. I let the curtain fall back into place, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. I was alone out here, miles from the nearest town. How could someone else be here? The tapping started again, this time at the living room window downstairs. I had to get to that phone. Taking a deep breath, I crept out of the bedroom and down the stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wooden floorboards. The living room was dark, lit only by slivers of moonlight peeking through the curtains. I made it to the phone and picked up the receiver, nearly sobbing with relief when I heard a dial tone. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my cabin, I whispered, afraid the intruder might hear me. They're trying to get in. I need help. Okay, stay calm. What's your location? I froze. In my panic, I'd forgotten the exact address of the rental cabin. I don't know the exact address. It's a rental, out in the woods, maybe 20 miles north of Pine Grove. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sir, we're going to need more information than that to send help. Are you in immediate danger? Before I could answer, a loud thud came from the front door, like someone had thrown their whole body against it. I dropped the phone, terror coursing through me. The thudding continued, the old wooden door groaning under the assault. I looked around wildly for a weapon, anything to defend myself. My eyes landed on the fireplace poker. Just as I grabbed it, the door burst open with a sickening crack. And there, silhouetted in the doorway, was the figure I'd seen in the woods. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and thin to be human. As it ducked to enter the cabin, I caught a glimpse of its face in the moonlight. My blood ran cold. Where there should have been eyes, there were only dark, empty sockets. I scrambled backwards, the poker held out in front of me like a sword. "Stay back," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. The creature tilted its head, regarding me with those empty eye sockets. Then, to my horror, it spoke. Its voice was like dry leaves rustling, barely above a whisper. "We've been waiting for you," it said. "For so long." "We?" I managed to choke out. As if in answer, more figures appeared in the doorway behind the first. 3, 4, 5 of them, all with the same elongated limbs and eyeless faces. They began to advance into the room, moving with an unnatural grace. I swung the poker wildly, but it passed right through the nearest creature as if it were made of smoke. In that moment, I realized that whatever these things were, they weren't physical beings. They were something else, something not of this world. I ran. Up the stairs, into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I pushed the heavy oak dresser in front of it, knowing even as I did so that it was futile. These things didn't need doors. Sure enough, they began to seep into the room, passing through the walls as if they were no more substantial than mist. They surrounded me, their eyeless gazes boring into me. "What do you want?" I cried, pressing myself against the wall. "To show you," the first one said. "To open your eyes." It reached out a long, spindly hand towards my face. I tried to pull away, but I was frozen in place, unable to move. As its cold fingers touched my forehead, the world around me began to shift and warp. The walls of the cabin melted away, replaced by swirling cosmic vistas. I saw impossible geometries, heard sounds that no human ear was meant to hear. In that moment, I understood. These beings weren't evil, weren't here to harm me. They were messengers, guardians of some greater truth that lay just beyond the veil of our reality. They showed me wonders and horrors beyond imagination, the birth and death of universes, the grand cosmic dance of creation and destruction. I saw my own life, my own death, played out across the tapestry of time. When I came back to myself, I was lying on the floor of the bedroom. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and birds were chirping outside. The creatures were gone, leaving no trace of their presence. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling from what I'd experienced. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by stress and isolation? But as I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, I knew it had been real. My hair had turned stark white, and in my eyes I could see the echoes of the cosmic vastness I'd witnessed. I left the cabin that day, driving back to the city in a daze. I tried to tell others what had happened, but the words always fell short. How could I describe the indescribable? In the years since, I've never been able to shake the memory of that night. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I hear those footsteps again, circling, and part of me, God help me, longs to see those eyeless faces once more, to peer again beyond the veil of our limited reality. Because once you've glimpsed the true nature of the universe, how can you ever be content with the mundane again? I know that they're still out there, waiting, and someday I think I might just go back to that cabin in the woods to see what other truths they have to show me. The first time I heard the footsteps in the attic, I dismissed them as the house settling. But when I found the half-eaten sandwich on the dusty floor, I knew with chilling certainty that I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was living above my head, and I was about to uncover a secret that would turn my quiet house-sitting gig into a waking nightmare. It was supposed to be an easy job. My parents, friends, the Millers, were going on a month-long European vacation, and they needed someone to watch their sprawling Victorian home. As a broke college student home for the summer, I jumped at the chance. A whole month in a beautiful house with nothing to do but water the plants and collect the mail. It seemed too good to be true. The first week was uneventful. I spent my days lounging by the pool, binge-watching shows on their massive TV, and relishing the solitude. The house was old but well-maintained, full of antique furniture and curious knickknacks. I found myself wandering from room to room, imagining the stories behind each object. It was during one of these explorations that I first noticed the attic door. It was tucked away at the end of a second-floor hallway, almost hidden behind a large armoire. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I made a mental note to ask the Millers about it when they returned, assuming it was just storage space. That night I woke to a strange sound. A soft thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps directly above my bedroom. I lay there, heart pounding, straining my ears. The footsteps moved across the ceiling, then stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. I told myself it was just the old house creaking, or maybe a raccoon had found its way into the attic. But a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me it was something else. The next day, I searched the house for the key to the attic door. I told myself I was just being thorough, checking all areas of the house as a responsible house-sitter should. But deep down, I knew I was looking for answers to the mysterious sounds. I found the key in Mr. Miller's desk drawer, a large, old-fashioned thing that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. With shaking hands, I returned to the attic door. The key slid in smoothly, and with a turn, the lock clicked open. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course, I thought. Why would it be that easy? Using my phone as a flashlight, I began to climb the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, and I winced at the noise, irrationally afraid of alerting something. The attic was a large, open space, filled with the usual clutter of forgotten belongings and dust-covered furniture. Moonlight filtered through a small, round window, casting long shadows across the floor. I swept my phone's light around, heart racing as I searched for any sign of an intruder. That's when I saw it. A makeshift bed tucked into a corner made from old blankets and what looked like seat cushions from a long-discarded couch. Beside it was a pile of food wrappers and empty water bottles, and there, on a rickety side table, was a half-eaten sandwich. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs in my haste to get out. I slammed the attic door shut, fumbling with the key to lock it again. My mind was reeling. Someone was living in the attic. How long had they been there? Did the Millers know? I ran to my room, grabbed my phone, and dialed the Millers' emergency contact number with trembling fingers. It went straight to voicemail. Of course, they were probably on a plane or in some remote part of Europe with no reception. I paced the room, debating what to do. Call the police? But what if I was overreacting? What if it was just a homeless person who had found a safe place to sleep? I didn't want to cause trouble if it wasn't necessary. I decided to wait until morning. I'd go up to the attic again in daylight, maybe leave a note explaining that I knew someone was there and asking them to leave. It wasn't the bravest plan, but it felt safer than confronting them directly. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak, every gust of wind against the windows had me sitting bolt upright in bed. I kept imagining someone creeping down the attic stairs, making their way to my room. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but determined. I wrote a note explaining that I was house-sitting, that I knew someone was in the attic, and asking them to please leave. I promised not to call the police if they went quietly. Armed with the note and a kitchen knife, just in case, I made my way back to the attic. The morning light made it less intimidating, but my heart was still racing as I climbed the stairs. The attic looked different in daylight. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through the small window. The makeshift bed was still there, but something felt off. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Everything was neat. Too neat. The bed was made, the trash was gone, and there was no sign of the half-eaten sandwich. Had they left already? Or were they just very tidy squatters? I placed the note on the bed and turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound coming from behind a large wardrobe in the corner. I froze, the knife clutched tightly in my sweating palm. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "I know you're there. Please, I don't want any trouble. Just come out and we can talk about this." Silence. Then slowly, the wardrobe door began to open. I raised the knife, prepared to defend myself. But what emerged from the wardrobe wasn't a person at all. It was... I don't even know how to describe it. A creature about the size of a large dog, but with too many legs. Its skin was a pale, sickly color, and where its face should have been, there was just a mass of writhing tentacles. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The creature made a high-pitched keening noise in response and scuttled towards me with alarming speed. I turned and ran, taking the attic stairs 2 at a time, not caring about the thunderous noise I was making. I burst out of the attic and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the key. I could hear the creature on the other side, its many legs scrabbling against the wood. The lock finally turned and I backed away, still clutching the knife. My mind was spinning. What was that thing? How long had it been up there, and most importantly, how was I going to get rid of it? I spent the rest of the day in a panic, alternating between pacing the house and sitting in terrified silence, straining to hear any sound from the attic. I tried calling the Millers again, and again got no answer. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That there was a tentacle monster in the attic? They'd think I was insane or on drugs. As night fell, the noises from the attic grew louder, thumps and scratches, and that awful keening sound. I huddled in the living room, every light in the house blazing, the TV on loud to drown out the sounds from above. Around midnight, the noises stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sounds had been. I sat there, hardly daring to breathe, waiting for what would happen next. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the attic door opening. I gripped the knife tighter, my eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the stairs. Slow, dragging footsteps made their way down the steps. A shadow appeared on the wall, grotesquely elongated and misshapen. And then it was there, in the doorway of the living room. In the bright light, it looked even more horrifying than it had in the attic. Its pale skin glistened wetly, and its tentacles writhed ceaselessly. But the most terrifying thing was its eyes. Dozens of them, spread across its body, all fixed on me with an unsettling intelligence. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then, to my utter shock, it spoke. Not with words, but directly into my mind. "Thank you," it said, its mental voice surprisingly gentle. "For not calling others, for giving me a chance to explain." I couldn't respond. I was too terrified, too confused. "I mean you no harm," it continued. "I am lost, far from home. I found safety here in this quiet place. But now I must go. Others will come looking soon." Before I could process what was happening, the creature turned and moved with surprising grace towards the front door. It opened the door with one of its many limbs and paused on the threshold. "Forget," it said, turning its many eyes towards me one last time. "For your own peace. Forget what you've seen. And then it was gone, melting into the darkness outside. I'd like to say I did forget, that I went on with my life as if nothing had happened. But how do you forget something like that? How do you go back to normal after you've seen proof that the world is so much stranger, so much more terrifying and wondrous than you ever imagined? I never told the Millers what happened. Never told anyone until now. But sometimes on quiet nights I find myself looking up at the stars and wondering, are they out there, those strange, tentacled beings? And will they ever return to the quiet attic where, for a brief time, one of them found refuge? I don't know the answers, but I do know one thing. I'll never look at an attic the same way again. The first time I noticed the car, I thought nothing of it. Just another vehicle in the parking lot, unremarkable in every way. But as the nights wore on and it remained there, always in the same spot, always occupied, a chill began to creep up my spine. Little did I know that seemingly innocuous car was about to turn my quiet night shift into a terrifying game of cat and mouse. I'd been working the graveyard shift at Meadowbrook Office Park for about 6 months. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills and gave me plenty of time to work on my writing. The massive complex was eerily quiet at night, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional whir of the cleaning crew's equipment to keep me company. My routine was simple. Clock in at 11 p.m., make my rounds every hour, and spend the time in between at the security desk, alternating between watching the cameras and pecking away at my laptop. It was mind-numbingly boring most nights, but I preferred it that way. Excitement in this line of work usually meant trouble. The car first appeared on a Tuesday. A nondescript sedan, dark blue or maybe black. It was hard to tell under the orange glow of the parking lot lights. I noticed it on my 2 a.m. round, parked in the far corner of the lot. The windows were tinted, but I could make out the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. I made a note of it in my log, but didn't think much more about it. Probably just someone taking a break on a long drive, or maybe a couple looking for some privacy. As long as they weren't causing trouble, it wasn't my problem. But the next night, it was there again. Same spot, same silhouette behind the wheel. I frowned as I noted it in the log for the second night in a row. Coincidence, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. By the fifth night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The car was always there, always occupied, always still. I never saw it arrive or leave. It was as if it materialized out of thin air each night, bringing its mysterious occupant with it. I debated calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I was spooked by a parked car? They'd laugh me off the phone. Besides, technically, the vehicle wasn't doing anything wrong. Public parking lot, no signs prohibiting overnight stays. On the seventh night, things changed. I was at my desk, engrossed in a particularly tricky scene in my novel, when movement on one of the security monitors caught my eye. The car was moving, slowly cruising through the parking lot. It made a complete circuit before returning to its usual spot. My heart was pounding as I watched the figure in the driver's seat. For the first time they moved, turning their head to look directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine. There was no way they could know where the cameras were unless they'd been studying the lot. Studying us. I picked up the phone, my hand hovering over the keypad. But before I could dial, the figure in the car raised their hand and waved. Not a friendly wave, but a slow, deliberate movement. A message. They knew I was watching. I slammed the phone down and stood up so fast my chair toppled over. This was too much. I needed to confront this person, find out what they wanted. Armed with nothing but my flashlight and a tenuous grasp on my courage, I headed for the parking lot. The night air was cool on my face as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the sweat beading on my forehead. The parking lot stretched out before me, a sea of shadows and reflected moonlight. And there, in its usual spot, sat the car. I approached slowly, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. As I got closer, I could see the figure more clearly. A man, I thought, though it was hard to be sure. He sat perfectly still, facing forward, showing no reaction to my approach. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice shakier than I'd like. "This is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." No response, no movement. It was as if I was talking to a statue. I took another step forward, my flashlight beam landing on the driver's side window. Sir? Can you hear me? You need to. The engine roared to life so suddenly I nearly jumped out of my skin. The car's headlights flicked on, momentarily blinding me. By the time my vision cleared, the vehicle was already moving, peeling out of the parking spot with a screech of tires. I watched, dumbfounded, as it sped towards the exit. Just before it turned onto the main road, the car slowed. The driver's window rolled down, and for a brief moment I caught a glimpse of the man inside. He turned to look at me, and even from a distance I could see the wide, unsettling grin on his face. Then he was gone, the taillights disappearing into the night. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally went back inside, I filled out an incident report with shaking hands. I knew how it would sound. Paranoid security guards spooked by a parked car, but I had to document it. Something about that grin, that deliberate wave at the camera, told me this wasn't over. I was right. The next night, the car wasn't there. I felt a mix of relief and unease as I made my rounds. Had he finally moved on? Or was this just the calm before the storm? I got my answer at 3 a.m. I was checking the cameras when I saw it. The now familiar sedan pulling into the lot. But this time it didn't stop at its usual spot. It kept driving, circling the building slowly. Round and round it went like a shark circling its prey. I watched, transfixed, as it completed its third loop. Then, without warning, it turned, heading straight for the main entrance of the building. My building, where I sat alone and increasingly terrified. I scrambled to lock down the building, my fingers fumbling with the security system controls. Just as I hit the final button, I heard it, the squeal of tires on pavement, followed by the sickening crunch of metal on metal. He had rammed the front doors. Alarms blared as I grabbed my phone, finally making the call I should have made days ago. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to break into Meadowbrook Office Park, I shouted over the noise. He's rammed his car into the building. Please, send someone quickly. I could hear the car's engine revving, the sound of the man trying to dislodge his vehicle from the mangled doors. Any second now, he'd break through. Sir, stay calm. Officers are on their way. Are you in a safe location? Safe? Was anywhere safe from this madman? I'm in the security office, I said. But I don't think... Another crash cut me off. He was through the doors. He's inside, I whispered into the phone. Oh God, he's inside the building. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty halls. The power had cut out when he hit the building, and the emergency lights cast long, shifting shadows. Every corner, every doorway could be hiding my stalker. Sir? Sir, are you there? The 911 operator's voice sounded tinny and far away. I ended the call and turned off my phone. I needed to hide, to be as quiet as possible. The footsteps were getting closer. There was a storage closet behind my desk. I slipped inside, closing the door as softly as I could. The space was tight, filled with cleaning supplies and spare computer parts. I crouched down, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps entered the security office. I held my breath, afraid that even the sound of my breathing might give me away. Through a crack in the door, I could see a sliver of the room. A shadow passed by, pausing at my desk. "Oh, security guard," a sing-song voice called out. "Where are you hiding?" I pressed my hand against my mouth, stifling a whimper. The voice was filled with a horrible glee, like this was all some twisted game. Come out, wherever you are," he continued. "Don't you want to know why I've been watching you all this time?" I didn't move, didn't breathe. The shadow moved again, and I caught a glimpse of the man for the first time in full light. He was ordinary looking, which somehow made him even more terrifying. This wasn't some movie monster. This was just a man with a wide, manic grin and eyes that gleamed with malice. He was standing right in front of the closet now. Surely he could hear my heart pounding. It seemed to echo in the small space, a drum beating out my terror. His hand reached for the doorknob. In the distance I heard sirens. The cavalry was coming. But would they be in time? The doorknob began to turn. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, the sirens grew louder, much louder. The man paused. "Well," he said, his voice now tight with anger. "Looks like our game will have to wait for another night." The shadow moved away. I heard rapid footsteps, then the screech of tires. By the time the police burst into the office, the man was long gone. They found me still crouched in that closet, shaking and unable to speak. It took hours of questioning before I could tell them everything. About the car, the nightly vigils, the chase. They promised to investigate to find the man who had terrorized me, but they never did. The car was found abandoned a few miles away, wiped clean of prints. The man had vanished into the night. I quit my job the next day, found a new apartment in a new city. But no matter where I go, I can't shake the feeling that someday I'll look out my window and see that car, waiting, watching, ready to resume our twisted game of cat and mouse. Every night I check my locks. Every night I peer out into the darkness. And every night I wonder, is this the night he comes back for me? The moment I saw his thumb jutting out from the side of the desolate highway, I knew I should have kept driving. But something in his stance, the defeated slump of his shoulders, made me slow down. Little did I know that simple act of kindness would spiral into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I'd been on the road for hours, making my way across the sun-baked landscape of the American Southwest. The unchanging scenery of scrub brush and distant mesas had lulled me into a sort of trance, my mind wandering as the miles ticked by on my odometer. The hitchhiker appeared like a mirage, shimmering in the heat haze on the horizon. As I got closer, he came into focus, a man in his mid-30s, I guessed, with sun-weathered skin and clothes that had seen better days. He looked harmless enough, just another traveler down on his luck. I slowed to a stop, rolling down my passenger side window. The blast of hot air that rushed in made me wince. "Where are you headed?" I called out. He jogged over, a grateful smile spreading across his face. "Anywhere but here, friend. Just trying to get to the next town." I hesitated for a moment, years of warnings about the dangers of picking up strangers flashing through my mind. But the oppressive heat made the decision for me. I couldn't leave him out here to bake in the sun. "Hop in," I said, reaching over to unlock the door. He tossed a beat-up backpack into the back seat and slid into the passenger seat with a sigh of relief. "Thanks, man, you're a lifesaver. I'm Mike," he said, extending a hand. I shook it, noting the roughness of his palm. "Tom, nice to meet you." As we pulled back onto the empty highway, I stole another glance at my new companion. Up close, I could see the weariness etched into the lines around his eyes, the way his gaze darted nervously around the car. "So what brings you out to the middle of nowhere?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Mike chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Long story, friend. Let's just say I'm trying to make a fresh start." I nodded, not wanting to pry. We all had our secrets, after all. For the next hour, we made small talk. Mike was surprisingly well-spoken for someone who looked like he'd been living rough. He asked about my job, my family, where I was headed. I found myself opening up more than I usually would to a stranger, something about his easy manner putting me at ease. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I noticed Mike growing more agitated. His responses became shorter, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror more often than the road ahead. "Everything okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. He started as if he'd forgotten I was there. Yeah, just keeping an eye out, you know." I didn't know, but I nodded anyway. The unease that had been slowly building in my gut suddenly spiked. Something was off about this whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Look," Mike said abruptly, "I need you to take the next exit." I frowned. "The next exit? But that's not towards the town. It's just a service road that—" "Just do it," he snapped, his previously friendly demeanor evaporating in an instant. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I think maybe it's time you got out, Mike. I can drop you off at the next rest stop, but—" I didn't finish the sentence. In a flash, Mike had pulled a knife from somewhere, the blade glinting wickedly in the fading sunlight. "Take the exit," he growled, pressing the tip of the knife against my ribs. My mouth went dry, heart hammering in my chest. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I took the exit, the car bumping along the poorly maintained service road. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this situation. I could try to grab the knife, but at these speeds that could end in a crash that would kill us both. "Keep driving," Mike instructed. his voice tight with tension. "And don't try anything stupid." We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The service road wound through increasingly rugged terrain, the scrubland giving way to rocky outcroppings. Finally, Mike spoke again. "Pull over here." I did as I was told, bringing the car to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by large boulders. The engine ticked as it cooled in the rapidly chilling desert air. "Get out," Mike ordered, gesturing with the knife. On shaky legs, I exited the car. Mike followed, keeping the knife trained on me. "Walk," he said, nodding towards a narrow path leading between two towering rocks. As we walked, the reality of my situation began to sink in. We were miles from anywhere, no one knew where I was, and I was at the mercy of a man with a knife, and God knows what intentions. "Listen, Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whatever's going on, we can figure this out. You don't have to." "Shut up," he hissed, jabbing the knife towards me. "Just keep walking." We emerged into another clearing, this one dominated by the rusted-out shell of an old trailer. Mike marched me towards it, kicking open the creaky door. "Inside," he ordered. The interior of the trailer was a mess of old furniture and debris. The musty smell of long abandonment filled my nostrils. "Sit," Mike said, pointing to a rickety chair. As I sat, he began to pace, running his free hand through his hair. He looked like a man on the edge, his eyes wild and unfocused. "I'm sorry," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I didn't want it to be like this, but they left me no choice." "Who, Mike?" I asked cautiously. "Who left you no choice?" He whirled on me, the knife flashing in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. "You don't understand. They're after me. They've been chasing me for days. I thought I'd lost them, but then I saw that black SUV on the highway and I knew they'd found me again." My mind reeled. Had I seen a black SUV? I couldn't remember. The highway had been so empty for so long. "Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "I didn't see any SUV. I think maybe you're confused, maybe dehydrated from being out in the heat. Why don't we go back to my car, get some water and—" "No, he shouted, making me flinch. "We can't go back. They'll be waiting. They're always waiting." He resumed his pacing, muttering to himself. I watched him, my fear slowly being replaced by pity. This man wasn't a hardened criminal. He was scared, possibly delusional. "Who are they, Mike?" I asked softly. He stopped, fixing me with a haunted stare. "The ones who want what I found. The ones who'll do anything to keep it secret." "What did you find?" Mike hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object, clenched tightly in his fist. Slowly, he opened his hand. In his palm sat a small metallic cube, no bigger than a die. Its surface was covered in intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and move as I looked at them. "I found it out in the desert," Mike whispered. "At first, I thought it was just some weird rock. But then it showed me things. Terrible, wonderful things. The truth about everything." I stared at the cube, mesmerized. The patterns did seem to be moving, forming and reforming into impossible shapes. "Mike," I said, tearing my gaze away from the object, "I think that thing might be dangerous. Maybe we should—" A sudden noise outside cut me off, the crunch of tires on gravel. Mike's eyes went wide with terror. "They're here," he breathed. Before I could react, he shoved the cube into my hand. "Take it," he hissed. "Run. Don't let them get it." Then he was gone, bolting out the back of the trailer. I sat there stunned, the cube feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. Outside, I could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting. In that moment, I had to make a choice. Run, as Mike had told me to, or stay and try to explain this insane situation to whoever was out there. But as I looked down at the cube, watching the patterns swirl and dance, I realized there was no choice at all. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct, screamed that this object could not fall into the wrong hands. I stood pocketing the cube. There had to be another way out of this trailer, another path through the rocks. As the voices outside grew closer, I began to search, my heart pounding in my ears. Whatever Mike had gotten himself into, I was now a part of it. And somehow I knew my life would never be the same. As I found a small rear window and squeezed through, dropping quietly to the ground outside, one thought echoed in my mind. I should have kept driving when I saw that thumb on the side of the road. But it was too late for regrets now. The chase was on, and I was running from shadows I couldn't even begin to understand. The first whisper caught me off guard, barely audible over the hum of the ancient computer. I dismissed it as my imagination, a trick of the late hour and the empty building. But when the footsteps started echoing through the halls, growing louder with each passing moment, I realized with chilling certainty that I was no longer alone in the university's deserted computer lab. It was supposed to be a typical all-nighter, the kind every college student pulls at least once a semester. My thesis was due in less than 48 hours, and I was woefully behind. The quiet solitude of the computer science building at 2 a.m. seemed like the perfect place to hunker down and crank out the remaining pages. I'd been there countless times before, always alone, always undisturbed. The night janitor, Bob, usually did his rounds around midnight, but other than a friendly nod, he never bothered me. Tonight, though, the building felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. I tried to focus on my work, the gentle clacking of the keyboard, the only sound breaking the stillness. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. It started with little things, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned to look. The sensation of breath on the back of my neck, even though I was alone in the room. I chalked it up to exhaustion and too much caffeine, forcing myself to keep typing. Then came the whisper. It was so faint at first I thought it was just the wind outside. But there it was again, a little louder this time. Words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. I spun around in my chair, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet lab. "Is someone there?" No response, just the soft hum of computers and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights. I turned back to my screen, trying to calm my racing heart. "Get it together," I told myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway outside. They weren't the familiar shuffle of Bob's worn-out sneakers. These were different. A sharp, rhythmic click-clack that echoed off the linoleum floors. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The footsteps grew closer, pausing just outside the lab door. I held my breath, waiting. The door handle turned slowly, the ancient hinges creaking as it opened. I spun around, expecting to see a security guard or maybe a fellow student, but there was no one there. The doorway gaped open, revealing only the darkened hallway beyond. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking slightly. "This isn't funny. Who's there?" The whispers started again, this time from multiple directions. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a cacophony of unintelligible murmurs that made my skin crawl. I stood up, my legs trembling. This was insane. I needed to get out of here, thesis be damned. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door, only to stop short as the whispers suddenly ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere deep within the building, came a scream. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a sound of pure terror and agony that echoed through the empty halls. I ran, out of the lab, down the hallway, my footsteps thundering in the silence that followed the scream. I reached the stairwell and took the steps 2 at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I reached the ground floor, I heard the click-clack of those footsteps again, this time from the floor above. They were moving fast, too fast, racing down the stairs behind me. I burst through the exit door, expecting to feel the cool night air on my face. Instead, I found myself in another hallway, identical to the one I'd just left. Confusion and panic warred within me. This was impossible. I knew this building like the back of my hand. The exit should have led outside. The footsteps were getting closer. I picked a direction at random and ran, passing door after door, all of them locked. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the fluorescent lights above flickering ominously. Finally, I saw a door marked "Exit" at the end of the hall. Relief flooded through me as I sprinted towards it. I grabbed the handle, turned it, and nothing. It was locked. No, 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 I muttered, yanking on the handle desperately. This couldn't be happening. The click-clack of footsteps stopped right behind me. I squeezed my eyes shut, not wanting to turn around, not wanting to see what had been chasing me. "Open your eyes, Michael," a voice said, soft and melodious. It was somehow familiar, though I knew I'd never heard it before. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned and opened my eyes. The figure before me was impossible. It shifted and changed as I looked at it, never settling on a single form. One moment it was tall and spindly with too many limbs. The next it was short and squat, its skin rippling like water. Its face, if you could call it that, was a swirling mass of features, eyes and mouths appearing and disappearing in a dizzying dance. "What are you?" I stammered, pressing myself against the locked door. The being's current mouth curved into a smile. "We are the Watchers," it said, its voice now a chorus of whispers. "We have always been here, in the spaces between, watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "For someone to see us," it replied. "For someone to believe." As it spoke, the hallway around us began to shift and warp. The walls melted away, revealing a vast, star-filled void. I felt myself starting to float, untethered from reality. "You've spent so many nights here, Michael," the being continued. "So close to the threshold. We've been trying to reach you, to show you the truth." Memories flashed through my mind. All those nights I'd spent alone in the lab, the odd sensations I'd dismissed, the fleeting glimpses of something just beyond my perception. "What truth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The being's form settled briefly into something almost human. "That your world is just one layer of many. That there are wonders and terrors beyond your wildest imagination, just waiting to be discovered." As it spoke, visions flooded my mind. I saw impossible cities built in the spaces between stars, creatures that defied description roaming through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. I saw the history of the universe unfold in an instant, and glimpsed futures that left me breathless with awe and terror. "Why me?" I managed to ask, my mind reeling from the onslaught of information. "Because you were open to it," the being replied. "Because you spent so many nights straddling the boundary between your world and ours. The veil between realities is thin in places like this, where human minds push themselves to their limits." I thought about all those late nights in the lab, the way my perception would shift after hours of staring at code, the strange ideas that would come to me in the early hours of the morning. "What happens now?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I felt. The being's form rippled again, its multitude of eyes fixing on me. "That's up to you, Michael. You can forget this, return to your world and your limited perception. Or, I prompted, or you can come with us, learn the secrets of the universe, become more than you ever dreamed possible." I hesitated. Part of me was screaming to run, to forget all of this and return to the safety of my normal life. But a larger part, the part that had always pushed me to learn more, to question everything, was thrilled at the prospect. "Will I be able to come back?" I asked. The being's laugh was like the tinkling of distant bells. "Oh, Michael, once you've seen beyond the veil, there's no going back. Not really. You'll always know what's out there, always feel the pull of the infinite." I took a deep breath, looking around at the star-filled void that had replaced the familiar hallways of the computer science building. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. "Okay," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "I'm ready." The being's form shifted one last time, extending what might have been a hand towards me. As I reached out to take it, I felt the last tethers of my old reality slip away. In that instant, as I stepped across the threshold into a universe of infinite possibilities, one final thought flashed through my mind. I really should have just gone home when the first whisper caught my attention. But then again, where would the fun in that be? And with that, Michael Thompson, graduate student and soon-to-be master of computer science, disappeared from the world he knew, embarking on an adventure beyond imagination. The computer lab fell silent once more, the unfinished thesis still glowing on the screen, waiting for a student who would never return to complete it. The moment the lights flickered out, plunging the house into darkness, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary babysitting gig. The sudden silence that followed, broken only by the pounding of rain against the windows, made my skin crawl. But it was the soft thud from upstairs, where the children were supposed to be sleeping, that sent a chill down my spine. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a night that would push me to the brink of terror. I'd been babysitting for the Thompsons for about 6 months. They were good people, always paid on time, and their kids, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Max, were sweet and well-behaved. It was an easy gig, usually just involving dinner, some TV, and then tucking the kids into bed before I spent the rest of the night doing homework or watching Netflix. This particular Friday night had started like any other. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson left for their date night around 7 p.m., leaving me with instructions to have the kids in bed by 9. We had pizza for dinner, played a few board games, and then I herded them upstairs for their baths and bedtime stories. By 9:30, both kids were tucked in, and I thought fast asleep. I settled onto the living room couch with my laptop, ready to catch up on some essays I had due. That's when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere, the sky opening up with a fury that made the windows rattle. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I sat there in the sudden darkness, my heart pounding. Power outages weren't uncommon during storms, but something about this felt different. The air seemed charged, heavy with a tension I couldn't explain. That's when I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My first thought was that the thunder had woken one of the kids. I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the dark house. "Lily? Max?" I called out as I climbed the stairs. "It's okay, guys, it's just a storm." No response. The upstairs hallway was pitch black, my phone's light barely cutting through the gloom. I approached Lily's room first, pushing open the door slowly. "Lily?" I whispered, shining the light towards her bed. My blood ran cold. The bed was empty, the covers thrown back as if she'd left in a hurry. Trying to quell the rising panic in my chest, I turned to Max's room. "Please be there," I thought desperately. "Please just be hiding from the storm." But Max's bed was empty too, both children gone. "Lily, Max," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallway. "This isn't funny. Come out now." Silence. Just the relentless pounding of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I searched every room upstairs, growing more frantic with each empty space I found. They weren't in the bathroom, not in their parents' room, not in any of the closets. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. As I stood in the hallway, trying to decide what to do next, I heard another sound, a giggle, high-pitched and childlike, coming from downstairs. Relief flooded through me. They must have snuck down while I was searching the rooms. I hurried back down the stairs, calling out, "Guys, you really scared me. Come on out now." The giggle came again, this time from the kitchen. I rounded the corner, my phone's light bouncing off the stainless steel appliances. "Lily? Max?" The kitchen was empty, but there on the floor was a small puddle of water, and leading away from it, a trail of wet footprints, child-sized footprints. My relief quickly turned to confusion, then to fear. Something wasn't right. The footprints led to the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. I'd only been down to the basement once when Mrs. Thompson asked me to grab some extra paper towels. It was unfinished, all concrete floors and exposed pipes, with boxes of holiday decorations and old toys piled in corners. Not a place the kids were allowed to play. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house and call the police. But I couldn't leave the children. Whatever was happening, I had to find them. The basement stairs creaked under my feet as I descended, my phone's light casting long, shifting shadows. The air grew colder with each step, and I could smell the damp, musty odor of the underground space. "Lily? Max?" I called out again, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Please come out. You're not in trouble, I promise." A rustling sound came from behind a stack of boxes. I moved towards it slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Guys," I whispered, peering around the boxes. What I saw made me stumble back, a scream caught in my throat. It looked like Lily and Max, but wrong. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their eyes too large and dark in their small faces. They stood unnaturally still, water dripping from their soaked pajamas. "What's going on?" I managed to stammer. "What happened to you?" They smiled in unison. an eerie, too-wide grin that sent shivers down my spine. When they spoke, it was with one voice, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We went for a swim," they said. "Won't you join us?" I shook my head, backing away slowly. This couldn't be real. I must have fallen asleep on the couch. This was just some bizarre nightmare. The children, or whatever they were, took a step forward. "Don't you want to play with us, Sarah?" they asked, their voices taking on a sing-song quality. "The water's so nice and cool." "Stay back," I warned, though my voice shook with fear. "What have you done with the real Lily and Max?" They tilted their heads in perfect synchronization, those two large eyes blinking slowly. "We are Lily and Max," they said. "We're just more now, and we want you to be more too." I turned to run, but found my path blocked. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a figure, tall and thin, its features hidden in shadow. Water dripped from its long, spindly limbs, forming a puddle on the concrete floor. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" The figure said nothing, but I heard its voice in my head, a sound like rushing water and grinding stones. "We are the beneath," it said. "We have always been here in the dark places, the wet places, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "For someone to invite us in," the children said from behind me. "And now we're here, and we're so very hungry." I looked frantically around the basement, searching for any means of escape. My eyes landed on a small window set high in the wall. It would be a tight squeeze, but it might be my only chance. I feinted to the left, then sprinted right, aiming for a stack of boxes beneath the window. Behind me, I heard the patter of small feet and the heavier tread of the tall figure. I scrambled up the boxes, my fingers scrabbling at the window latch. Just as I felt long, cold fingers grip my ankle, the window popped open. I pulled myself through, feeling my shirt tear on the rough edge of the window frame. I tumbled onto the wet grass outside, the rain still coming down in sheets. I ran, across the backyard, through the gate, down the street. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, soaked to the bone and gasping for breath. The police, of course, didn't believe me. They found the house exactly as it should be. 2 children sleeping peacefully in their beds, no sign of any disturbance. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were understandably upset, thinking I had abandoned their children to run out into the storm. I lost my babysitting job, and my reputation in the neighborhood was ruined. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, and I knew that something dark and hungry had found its way into our world. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I think I can hear children giggling outside my window. And in my dreams, I still see those 2 large eyes and hear that watery voice inviting me to join them in the cool, dark depths. I never babysat again after that night. And I always check under my bed before I go to sleep. Because now I know that the monsters aren't just the stuff of childhood nightmares. They're real, they're hungry, and they're waiting for an invitation to come in. The first time I noticed my neighbor's odd behavior, I brushed it off as simple eccentricity. But as the days passed and more residents of our apartment building began acting strangely, a chilling realization crept over me. Something sinister was lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary lives, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. I'd moved into the Oakwood apartments just 3 months ago, drawn by the affordable rent and convenient location. It was an older building, a bit worn around the edges, but it had character. The residents were a mix of young professionals, small families, and retirees, a typical cross-section of urban life. At first, everything seemed normal. I'd exchange pleasantries with my neighbors in the hallway, chat with Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B while collecting my mail, and occasionally run into Tom from 2A in the laundry room. It was all wonderfully, boringly ordinary. Then about a month ago, things started to change. It began with Mrs. Rodriguez. One morning, as I was heading out to work, I saw her standing in the hallway, staring blankly at the wall. When I said good morning, she didn't respond. She just kept staring, unblinking, at a spot just above my head. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, a little louder this time. "Are you okay?" She blinked slowly, then turned to look at me. For a moment, her eyes seemed wrong, too dark, too empty. But then she smiled, and everything seemed normal again. "Oh, good morning, dear," she said, her voice a bit too cheery. I must have been daydreaming. Have a wonderful day. I chalked it up to her getting older, maybe having a senior moment. But over the next few days, I noticed more odd behavior from other residents. Tom from 2A, usually so meticulous about separating his whites and colors, was shoving all his laundry into one machine, including what looked like muddy shoes. When I pointed it out, he just smiled vacantly and said, "It's all the same in the end, isn't it?" The young couple in 4C, who I'd often hear arguing through the thin walls, fell silent, completely silent. I never heard a peep from their apartment anymore, not even footsteps or the sound of their TV. And Mr. Jenkins, the grumpy old man from 1A who used to complain about everything, started greeting everyone with an unnaturally wide smile and a cheery, "Isn't it a beautiful day?" Each incident on its own might not have been cause for alarm, but taken together, they painted a picture that made my skin crawl. It was as if someone had replaced my neighbors with pod people from an old sci-fi movie. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a gas leak making everyone act weird, or perhaps some sort of mass hysteria had taken hold of the building. But deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. My suspicions were confirmed late one night when I couldn't sleep. I heard a strange, rhythmic thumping coming from the hallway. Curiosity overcoming my fear, I crept to my door and peered through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. All of my neighbors were in the hallway, moving in unison. They were doing some sort of dance, their movements jerky and unnatural, and they were all smiling those two wide smiles, their eyes dark and empty. I stumbled back from the door, my heart pounding. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of nightmare, but the thumping continued, growing louder. And then I heard something else, a low humming chant that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, lights off, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. But when morning came and I cautiously ventured out, I knew it had been no dream. The hallway carpet was scuffed and dirty, as if dozens of feet had been shuffling across it all night. And my neighbors, they all looked exhausted with dark circles under their eyes, but they were still smiling those unnatural smiles. "Good morning," Mrs. Rodriguez chirped as I passed her in the hall. "Isn't it a wonderful day to be alive?" I mumbled a response and hurried past her, my skin crawling. I had to figure out what was going on. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I started keeping a log of my neighbors' behaviors, noting every oddity, every out-of-character action. I even went so far as to set up a small camera pointed at my door, hoping to catch another midnight gathering. But the more I observed, the more terrified I became. It wasn't just their behavior that was off. Physical changes were happening too. Mr. Jenkins, who had always stooped with age, now stood unnaturally straight. The young woman from 4C seemed to have grown several inches taller overnight. And Tom's eyes, I could have sworn they had changed color. I knew I should leave, find somewhere else to live, but a morbid curiosity kept me there. I had to know what was happening. One night, about a week after I'd witnessed the hallway dance, I heard a knock at my door. It was past midnight and I hadn't been sleeping well, too keyed up from constant vigilance. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Rodriguez standing there, still smiling that too-wide smile. "Hello, dear," she called through the door. "We've noticed you haven't been joining us for our nightly gatherings. Won't you come out and play?" I backed away from the door, my mouth dry with fear. "I'm not feeling well," I called back. "Maybe another time." "Oh, but we insist," came another voice. Tom's voice, but not quite right. Too deep, too resonant. "It's time for you to join us, to become one of us." The door handle began to rattle. They were trying to get in. I ran to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. The main door of my apartment crashed open and I could hear them filing in. Their footsteps were oddly in sync, a rhythmic thumping that matched the pounding of my heart. Come out," they called in unison. "It's time to shed your old self, time to evolve." I looked around frantically for an escape route. The window was my only option. I was on the 3rd floor, but there was a fire escape. If I could just reach it. I could hear them outside my bedroom door now. The wood began to splinter as they pounded on it. With shaking hands, I pushed open the window and climbed out onto the fire escape. The cool night air hit me, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. I could get away. I could be free. But as I looked down, my hope turned to ashes. The courtyard below was filled with people, not just from our building, but from the surrounding neighborhood too. All of them looking up at me with those dark, empty eyes, all of them smiling those terrible smiles. "Join us," they called up to me. "Become one with us." Behind me, I heard my bedroom door finally give way. I turned to see my former neighbors crowding onto the fire escape, their bodies twisting and changing in ways that defied explanation. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. I could give in, become one of them, lose myself to whatever madness had taken hold of this place, or I could jump and take my chances with the crowd below. I chose to jump. As I fell through the air, time seemed to slow. I saw my neighbors' faces, watched as they morphed and changed, becoming something inhuman. I saw the crowd below, their arms outstretched to catch me, to absorb me into their mass. And then, darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body battered but alive. The doctors told me I was lucky that a tree had broken my fall. They said I'd been babbling about monsters and body snatchers when I was brought in. No one believed my story, of course. They chalked it up to a mental breakdown, said the stress of city life had gotten to me. The Oakwood Apartments, they assured me, was just a normal building filled with normal people. But I know the truth. I saw what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that rhythmic thumping, still see those dark, empty eyes and too wide smiles. I never returned to the Oakwood Apartments. I moved far away to a small town where I thought I'd be safe. But every so often I'll see someone on the street whose smile is just a little too wide, whose eyes are just a little too dark. And I wonder, how far has it spread? And how long before there's nowhere left to run? The moment I saw those desperate eyes peering out from the back window of the van, I knew my quick pit stop was about to turn into a nightmare. What I didn't realize was that by the end of the night, I'd be running for my life, questioning everything I thought I knew about the quiet highways of Middle America. It had been a long day of driving. I was on my way to my sister's wedding in Colorado, opting for a road trip instead of a flight to save some cash. The monotony of the highway had lulled me into a kind of trance, the yellow lines blurring together as I pushed on through the night. When I saw the sign for a rest stop coming up, I decided to pull in. My gas tank was running low, and my bladder wasn't far behind. Plus, I figured some caffeine wouldn't hurt to keep me alert for the last leg of the journey. The rest stop was like any other I'd seen across the country. A small building housing restrooms and vending machines, a couple of picnic tables, and a dimly lit parking lot. At this late hour, it was nearly deserted. Just a couple of semis in the far corner, their drivers presumably catching some sleep, and a dark van parked near the building. I pulled up to the gas pump, stretching as I got out of my car. The night air was cool on my face, a welcome change from the stuffy interior of my vehicle. As I started to fill up my tank, movement caught my eye. The van's back window was dirty and tinted, but I could swear I saw a face pressed against it. A woman's face, her eyes wide with what looked like fear. She seemed to be mouthing something, but I couldn't make it out. I blinked and the face was gone. Had I imagined it? The long hours on the road must be getting to me, I thought. I shook my head and finished filling up my tank. As I walked towards the building to use the restroom, I passed by the van. It was an older model, rusty around the edges with no windows except for the ones in front and back. Something about it made me uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Inside the rest stop building, I used the facilities and then made my way to the vending machines. As I was deciding between a Coke and a coffee, the door burst open. A man walked in, his eyes darting around nervously. He was tall and wiry, with a scraggly beard and clothes that had seen better days. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw something in his gaze that made my blood run cold. It was a look of desperation, of barely contained violence. Then he blinked, and it was gone, replaced by a forced smile. "Evening," he said, his voice gruff. "Nice night for a drive, huh?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He walked past me to the restroom, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something was very wrong here. I quickly grabbed my coffee and headed back to my car. As I passed the van again, I heard it, a soft thumping sound coming from inside. I paused, straining my ears. There it was again, followed by what sounded like a muffled cry. My heart started racing. The face in the window, the strange man, the sounds from the van, it all added up to something sinister. I knew I should just get in my car and drive away, pretend I hadn't seen or heard anything, but I couldn't. If someone was in trouble, I couldn't just leave them. I approached the van cautiously, my phone in my hand, 911 already dialed and ready to call. As I got closer, the thumping got louder. I reached out, my hand shaking, and knocked on the side of the van. "Hello?" I called out softly. "Is someone in there? Do you need help?" The thumping stopped abruptly. For a moment there was silence. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, a woman's voice. "Please, help us." My blood ran cold. Us. There was more than one person in there. Before I could respond, I heard the rest-stop door slam open. The man was back, and he did not look happy. "Hey!" he shouted, starting to run towards me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I didn't think, I just acted." I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I heard the man's footsteps getting closer. I managed to get the door open and threw myself inside, locking it just as the man reached me. He slammed his hands on my window, his face contorted with rage. "Mind your own business," he snarled. "You don't know what you're messing with." I started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The man stepped back as I put the car in reverse, but his eyes never left mine. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I could see him in my rearview mirror, running back to the van. My mind was racing as I sped down the highway. What had I just stumbled upon? A kidnapping? Human trafficking? Whatever it was, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just drive away and leave those people in that van. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I'd seen to the dispatcher. They told me to keep driving, that they were sending patrol cars to the rest stop. But as I hung up, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. Headlights that were getting closer at an alarming speed. It was the van. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal, pushing my old car to speeds it was never designed for. But the van was faster, slowly but surely gaining on me. I weaved through the sparse traffic, ignoring the angry honks from the other drivers. The van stayed right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see its headlights in my mirrors anymore. Suddenly, I saw a sign for an upcoming exit. Without thinking, I swerved across 2 lanes of traffic and took the exit ramp at a speed that had my tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I saw the van overshoot the exit. I'd bought myself some time, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they figured out where I'd gone. The exit led to a small town, its streets deserted at this late hour. I turned randomly, taking rights and lefts without any real plan, just trying to put as much distance between me and the van as possible. After a few minutes of this, I found myself on a dark residential street. I pulled over, killing the lights and engine. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out what to do next. Should I keep driving? Try to find a police station? Go back to the highway and hope to run into the patrol cars the dispatcher had sent? As I sat there, paralyzed with indecision, I saw headlights approaching. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the outline of the van. It was driving slowly down the street, as if searching for something. Searching for me. I slouched down in my seat, praying they wouldn't notice my car. The van crawled past, so close I could have reached out and touched it. I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle until the red taillights had disappeared around a corner. Once I was sure they were gone, I started my car again, this time with a plan. I needed to get back to the highway, to find those patrol cars. It was the only way to help the people trapped in that van. As I navigated back through the town, my mind kept replaying the events of the night. The face in the window, the sounds from the van, the man's rage when he caught me snooping. What kind of monster was he? And how many others like him were out there, prowling the highways, preying on the vulnerable? I made it back to the highway, my eyes constantly checking my mirrors for any sign of the van. As I merged onto the road, I saw the most beautiful sight, flashing blue and red lights up ahead. The patrol cars had found me. I pulled over, waving frantically at the officers as they approached. The story spilled out of me in a rush, all the details I could remember about the van, the man, the sounds I'd heard. The officers took my statement, their faces grim. They told me I'd done the right thing by calling it in, that they'd put out an APB on the van. But as I sat there, watching more patrol cars speed past, lights flashing, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. That van could be anywhere by now. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the highway, I couldn't help but think about the people in the van. Were they still alive? Would they be found? and how many other vans were out there, hiding dark secrets behind their tinted windows. I never made it to my sister's wedding. Somehow, after what I'd been through, it didn't seem important anymore. Instead, I found myself telling my story to anyone who would listen. The police, the FBI, the media. I wanted the world to know what was happening on our highways, in our rest stops, right under our noses. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat. The image of those desperate eyes peering out from the van's window burned into my memory. And every time I see a van on the road, I can't help but wonder, who's inside? And are they crying out for help that will never come? The first note appeared on a Tuesday, slipped under the front door like a whisper of danger. "Get out while you can," it read in jagged, urgent letters. I laughed it off as a prank, but as the week wore on and the messages grew increasingly sinister, I realized that my simple house-sitting job had turned into a waking nightmare. It was supposed to be an easy gig. My college roommate Sarah asked if I could watch her place for a month while she was on a work assignment overseas. Her house was a charming little Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, complete with a white picket fence and a garden that would make any green thumb jealous. I jumped at the chance. A whole month away from my cramped studio apartment sounded like heaven. The first few days were uneventful. I watered the plants, collected the mail, and spent my evenings curled up on Sarah's comfortable couch, binge-watching shows on her massive TV. It was peaceful, almost too quiet after the constant noise of my apartment building. Then came that first note. I found it when I came back from grocery shopping, a small piece of paper lying innocently on the welcome mat. The message was short but chilling. I turned it over in my hands, looking for any clue about its origin, but there was nothing. Just those 5 words, scrawled in what looked like black marker. I shook my head, crumpling the paper and tossing it in the trash. Probably just some kids in the neighborhood playing a prank. I pushed it out of my mind and went about my day. The second note came 2 days later, this time slipped under the door sometime during the night. I found it when I came downstairs for my morning coffee. This one was longer. "The walls have eyes. They know you're here. Leave now." A chill ran down my spine as I read it. The handwriting was the same as the first note, but there was something more urgent about this message. I found myself glancing at the walls, half expecting to see eyes staring back at me. "Don't be ridiculous," I told myself. "It's just another stupid prank." But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. I started double-checking the locks before bed, drawing the curtains tight against the night. The third note appeared the very next day, stuck to the bathroom mirror when I got out of the shower. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it, dripping water onto the tile floor as I stood frozen in shock. How had someone gotten into the house? This message was the most disturbing yet. "They're coming for you. I can't hold them back much longer. Run." I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. They came and took a report, but there were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints on the notes. They suggested it might be kids in the neighborhood and promised to increase patrols in the area. I called Sarah next, wondering if she had any enemies, anyone who might want to scare her or me out of the house. But she was as baffled as I was, insisting that she had good relationships with all her neighbors. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind outside, had me sitting bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. I kept the bedroom door locked, a chair propped under the handle for good measure. The fourth note was waiting for me in the morning, slipped under my bedroom door despite my precautions, 2 words written larger than the others, filling the entire page. Too late. I ran. I didn't even pack a bag, just grabbed my phone and my keys and bolted out the front door in my pajamas. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. Who was leaving these notes? What did they mean? And why me? It was dark by the time I worked up the courage to go back to the house. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the darkened windows, half expecting to see a shadowy figure watching me. Finally, taking a deep breath, I went inside. The house was quiet, exactly as I'd left it in my panicked flight. I did a thorough search, checking every room, every closet, even under the beds. Nothing seemed out of place. No new notes. I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and confused. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this really was just an elaborate prank that had gone too far. That's when I heard it. a soft scratching sound coming from inside the walls. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, like something was moving within the very structure of the house. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. Then, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Help us." I scrambled off the couch, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Show yourself." More whispers joined the first, a chorus of barely audible voices pleading for help. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, growing louder with each passing second. I ran to the front door, yanking it open, ready to flee again. But I stopped short at the threshold. The street outside was wrong. The houses across the way were twisted, their shapes elongated and warped as if seen through funhouse mirrors. The sky above was a swirling mass of unnatural colors, and I could see things moving in it, things that defied description. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be real, I had to be dreaming. The whispers were all around me now, accompanied by that awful scratching sound. The walls seemed to pulse, the wallpaper rippling like waves on water. A new note appeared, materializing out of thin air to flutter to the ground at my feet. With trembling hands, I picked it up. "We tried to warn you," it read. "Now you're one of us." As I read those words, I felt a strange sensation, as if the very substance of my being was changing. I looked down at my hands and watched in horror as they began to fade, becoming translucent. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was becoming part of the house, my consciousness merging with the others trapped within its walls. In my last moments of individuality, I understood the truth. This house was a trap, a living entity that lured in victims and absorbed them. Sarah, my friends, my family, they had never existed. They were fabrications, false memories implanted by the house to draw me in. How many others had fallen for this trick? How many souls were trapped here, their essences used to feed this monstrous dwelling? As my physical form dissolved completely, my awareness spread throughout the structure. I could feel the others now, countless minds all linked together in a vast, horrifying network. And I knew that soon, another unsuspecting victim would come. A new house sitter, perhaps, or a curious buyer attracted by the quaint Victorian on the quiet street. I wanted to warn them, to tell them to run while they still could. But all I could do was whisper, my voice joining the chorus of the damned, trapped forever in this house of horrors. As my consciousness faded into the collective, one last thought echoed through what remained of my mind. I should have heeded the warnings. I should have gotten out while I still could. But now, like all the others, I was part of the house, and the house was always hungry for more. The moment I realized the car behind me wasn't just coincidentally going my way, but deliberately following my every move, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the late-night air conditioning. What started as a routine drive home was about to become a terrifying game of cat and mouse through the darkened streets of a town I thought I knew. It had been a long day at work, one of those shifts that seemed to stretch on forever. By the time I clocked out, it was well past midnight. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to the other night owls of the office. I remember yawning as I got into my car, thinking about nothing more than the leftover pizza waiting for me in the fridge and the soft embrace of my bed. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists in the small hours of the morning. I was about halfway home when I first noticed the car. It was a dark sedan, nondescript in every way. I couldn't make out the driver, just a silhouette behind tinted windows. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, there were only so many routes through town at this hour. But as I made turn after turn, the car stayed with me. Always 3 or 4 lengths back, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. A tendril of unease began to curl in my stomach. I decided to test my suspicion. Instead of taking my usual left towards home, I made a right. The car followed. I took another random turn. Again, it was right behind me. My heart started to race. This couldn't be a coincidence. Someone was following me, but why? My mind raced through possibilities. A robbery, some kind of sick game, or something even worse. I tried to stay calm, to think rationally, Maybe if I just drove to a well-lit public place, they'd give up and leave. I turned towards the 24-hour supermarket on Main Street. As I pulled into the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The car had stopped at the entrance, idling. I could see the driver now, a man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the shadows. I parked near the front of the store, under the bright lights. My hands were shaking as I cut the engine. I sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. When I looked up, my blood ran cold. The car was gone. For a split second, I felt relief. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just paranoia born from too many late nights and too much true crime TV. Then I saw him, the man from the car, walking purposefully across the parking lot, towards me. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with my keys, trying to start the car again, but in my haste, I dropped them. By the time I retrieved them from under the seat, the man was at my window. He rapped on the glass with something metallic. In the harsh fluorescent light of the parking lot, I saw it was a gun. "Open the door," he mouthed, gesturing with the weapon. My mind went blank with terror. This couldn't be happening, not to me. Not here in this quiet town where nothing ever happened. With trembling hands, I locked the doors instead. The man's face contorted with anger. He raised the gun, aiming it at the window. I didn't think, I just acted. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, not even checking if anyone was behind me. The man leapt back as I peeled out of the parking space. I heard a sharp crack, a gunshot. My rear window exploded in a shower of glass. I screamed, ducking instinctively even as I floored the accelerator. The car fishtailed as I made a wild turn onto the street, tires squealing in protest. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man running back to his car. I had a head start, but his car was newer, faster. I knew he'd catch up soon if I didn't do something. I took a hard right, then another, trying to lose him in the maze of residential streets. My mind was racing faster than my car. Where could I go? The police station was on the other side of town. My house wasn't safe. He'd seen which way I usually drove. I made a split-second decision and headed for the highway. At this time of night, it would be nearly empty, but it was my best chance to outrun him. As I merged onto the on-ramp, I saw headlights in my mirror. He had found me. The sedan was gaining ground, eating up the distance between us. I pushed my old car to its limits, the engine whining in protest as the speedometer crept past 90, then 100. But it wasn't enough. The sedan was still coming. Suddenly, an idea struck me. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was all I had. About a mile ahead was a sharp turn, the kind that required slowing down even in good conditions. Beyond it was a steep embankment leading down to the river. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the steering wheel. I could do this. I had to do this. As I approached the turn, I didn't slow down. If anything, I sped up. In my mirror, I saw the sedan getting closer. Just a few more seconds. At the last possible moment, I slammed on the brakes and wrenched the wheel to the right. My car skidded, the tires screaming as they fought for traction. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd miscalculated, that I was going to go over the edge. But then the car straightened out, fishtailing wildly but staying on the road. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I heard the crash, the screech of metal on metal, the shattering of glass. When I finally dared to check my mirror, the sedan was gone. In its place was a gaping hole in the guardrail. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove and drove, putting as much distance between me and that turn as possible. It wasn't until I saw the "Welcome to Pennsylvania" sign that I finally pulled over. I was miles from home, running on fumes and coming down from the biggest adrenaline rush of my life. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I sat on the hood of my car and tried to process what had happened. Who was that man? Why had he targeted me? And had I just killed him? I knew I should call the police, report what had happened. But a part of me was afraid. Afraid they wouldn't believe me. Afraid that somehow I'd end up being the one in trouble. So I did the only thing I could think of. I drove to the nearest diner, ordered a coffee, and started planning. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Whoever that man was, he might have friends, and they might come looking for me. As I sat there, watching the early morning crowd trickle in, I realized my life had changed irrevocably. I was no longer just another office worker in a small town. I was a survivor, a fugitive, a killer. I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I could never let my guard down again. Because out there on some dark and lonely road, there might be another car, another pursuer, another fight for survival. And next time I might not be so lucky. With hands that still trembled slightly, I pulled out a map. It was time to disappear, time to become someone new, someone who had never been chased down a midnight highway by a stranger with a gun. As I plotted my new course, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, checking the parking lot for any cars that didn't belong. Old habits die hard, I suppose, and some lessons, once learned, are impossible to forget. The waitress came by to refill my coffee. "Long night?" she asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance. I managed a weak smile. "You have no idea." The moment I saw the empty sleeping bag where Jake should have been, I knew our camping trip had taken a terrifying turn. The early morning mist hung heavy in the air, obscuring the edges of our campsite, but there was no mistaking the fact that one of us was missing. And as I stood there, heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that the strange lights we'd seen in the sky last night had something to do with it. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, just 4 friends looking for a thrill in the wilderness. We'd heard the stories about this area, of course. Whispered tales of UFO sightings, mysterious lights in the sky, and campers who swore they'd lost time. But we didn't really believe it. Or at least I didn't. It was all just part of the excitement, wasn't it? Now, as I stared at Jake's abandoned sleeping bag, I wasn't so sure anymore. "Guys, wake up," I hissed, nudging Sarah and Mike awake. "Jake's gone." Sarah bolted upright, her eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean, gone?" Mike was slower to wake, grumbling as he unzipped his sleeping bag. "He probably just went to take a leak, chill out." But as we called out for Jake, our voices echoing through the misty forest, an eerie silence was our only answer. No birds chirping, no rustling of leaves, just an oppressive, unnatural quiet that sent shivers down my spine. We searched the immediate area around our campsite, but there was no sign of Jake. No footprints leading away, no discarded clothing, nothing. It was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. "This isn't funny, Jake," Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with fear. "Come out now." But deep down, we all knew this wasn't some elaborate prank. Something was very, very wrong. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist, we expanded our search. We combed through the surrounding forest, calling Jake's name until our voices were hoarse. But with each passing hour, our hope dwindled. It was mid-afternoon when things started to get weird. I was pushing through a dense patch of underbrush when suddenly, the world seemed to flicker. For a split second, everything around me changed. The trees were taller, older. The ground was covered in a strange, iridescent moss. And the sky was a deep, unnatural purple. I blinked and everything was back to normal. But the image was seared into my mind, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Sarah and Mike looked at me, confusion etched on their faces. "See what?" Mike asked. I tried to explain, but the words sounded crazy even to my own ears. They exchanged worried glances, clearly thinking I was losing it, but I knew what I'd seen, and I had a sinking feeling that it was somehow connected to Jake's disappearance. As the day wore on, similar incidents began to plague all of us. Sarah swore she saw strange symbols carved into tree trunks, only for them to vanish when she looked again. Mike kept hearing whispers in a language he couldn't understand, always just on the edge of his hearing. And me? I kept experiencing those flashes, those moments where reality seemed to shift. Each time the alternate world I glimpsed became clearer, more vivid, and each time I felt a pull, as if something was trying to draw me in. Night fell, and we were no closer to finding Jake. Exhausted and terrified, we made our way back to the campsite. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were lost. The forest around us seemed different, unfamiliar. Had we wandered farther than we thought, or was something else at play? We huddled around the campfire, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The sky above was clear, the stars impossibly bright. But as we watched, the stars began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, swirling in impossible patterns. "This can't be happening," Sarah whispered, clutching my arm so tight it hurt. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, a blinding light flooded our campsite. It was so bright, so all-encompassing that for a moment I thought I'd gone blind. I could hear Sarah and Mike screaming, but their voices sounded distant, muffled. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light was gone. But we weren't in our campsite anymore. We were somewhere else. The air was thick and heavy, filled with a strange, sweet scent that made my head spin. The ground beneath our feet pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and all around us tall, spindly figures moved in the shadows, their movements fluid and unnatural. "Welcome," a voice echoed in my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. "We've been waiting for you." One of the figures stepped forward, and I felt my heart stop. It was Jake. But not Jake. His eyes were too large, his skin pale and translucent. When he smiled, his teeth were sharp and numerous. "Don't be afraid," not Jake said, his voice an unsettling mix of familiar and alien. "You're home now." I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, unresponsive. And as I stood there, paralyzed, I realized with growing horror that this was real. We hadn't just stumbled upon a UFO hotspot. We'd walked right into a trap. The creatures, for I couldn't think of them as anything else, moved closer, their long fingers reaching out to touch us. Each touch sent jolts of electricity through my body, and with each jolt, I felt myself changing. My perception shifted. My thoughts became clouded. I could see the same thing happening to Sarah and Mike. Their features were subtly altering, becoming more like Jake's, more like the creatures around us. And the worst part? A small, growing part of me was beginning to think that this was right, that we belonged here. Time lost all meaning. It could have been hours or days or years that we stood there, being remade by these alien touches. Memories of our old lives began to fade, replaced by new ones. Memories of a world with purple skies and pulsing ground, of ships that sailed between the stars. But just as I was about to lose myself completely, a small part of my mind rebelled. This wasn't right. This wasn't our world. We didn't belong here. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I fought against the alien influence. I clung to memories of home, of my family, of who I really was, and slowly, painfully, I began to break free. "No," I shouted, my voice sounding strange and distorted. "This isn't real. Sarah, Mike, Jake, we have to get out of here." My words seemed to break whatever spell had been cast over us. Sarah and Mike's eyes cleared, confusion and fear replacing the placid acceptance that had been there moments before. Even Jake seemed to falter, a flicker of recognition passing over his alien features. The creatures hissed, their forms shifting and writhing in anger. The world around us began to destabilize, reality bending and warping like a funhouse mirror. I grabbed Sarah and Mike's hands, reaching out to Jake with my free hand. "Come on!" I yelled. "We're going home!" For a moment, Jake hesitated. Then, with a look of desperate hope, he grabbed my hand. The moment our fingers touched, there was a flash of blinding light, a sensation of falling, and then we were back in our campsite, the normal Earth campsite. The sun was just beginning to rise, birds were chirping, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. The memories of our ordeal were already beginning to fade, like a dream upon waking. But the fear, the sense of wrongness that lingered. And as we looked at each other, seeing the haunted look in each other's eyes, we knew that none of us would ever be the same. We packed up camp in silence, eager to put as much distance between us and this place as possible. As we hiked back to our car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere just beyond the veil of our reality, those creatures were waiting for another chance to bring us home. We never spoke about what happened that night. How could we? Who would believe us? But sometimes when I look up at the night sky, I swear I can see the stars moving in those impossible patterns. And I wonder, with a mixture of fear and a strange, unsettling longing, if they'll ever come back for us. Because the truth is, a small part of me, a part I try to ignore, is hoping they will, is hoping. The moment I saw the doll's eyes move, I knew I had inherited more than just an antique dollhouse. A chill ran down my spine as I watched the tiny porcelain figure turn its head, its glass eyes fixing on me with an unsettling intensity. In that instant, I realized the stories my grandmother had told me weren't just fairy tales, they were warnings. I'd always been fascinated by the ornate Victorian dollhouse that sat in my grandmother's attic. As a child, I'd spend hours playing with it, imagining the lives of the little dolls that inhabited its miniature rooms. Grandma would watch me with a mix of affection and concern, often muttering about how the house had a mind of its own. When she passed away last month, I was surprised to find that she'd left the dollhouse to me in her will. Along with it came a cryptic note. "Be careful, Emily. Some toys aren't meant to be played with." I'd laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to my grandmother's flair for the dramatic. But now, as I stood in my living room watching a doll move on its own, that warning didn't seem so silly anymore. The dollhouse had seen better days. Years in the attic had left it dusty and faded, its once vibrant wallpapers peeling at the edges. I'd decided to restore it, both as a way to honor my grandmother's memory and to distract myself from the grief of losing her. For weeks, I'd worked on it every evening after coming home from my job at the local library. I'd carefully replaced torn wallpaper, fixed tiny pieces of broken furniture, and even made new curtains for the windows. It was painstaking work, but I found it oddly soothing. Until tonight. I'd been putting the finishing touches on the parlor when I noticed one of the dolls. A lady in a blue dress was out of place. I could have sworn I'd left her in the bedroom upstairs. Shrugging it off, I reached in to move her back. That's when she turned and looked at me. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair in my haste to get away from the dollhouse. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Dolls didn't move. They didn't look at you with eyes that seemed far too alive. And yet, as I watched from across the room, the lady in the blue dress stood up. She actually walked, across the tiny parlor to the window. There she raised one miniature hand and beckoned to me. Against my better judgment, I found myself moving closer. As I approached, I could hear a faint sound coming from the dollhouse. It sounded like whispering. I leaned in, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, becoming a cacophony of tiny voices, all speaking at once. I couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was urgent, pleading. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my finger. I jerked my hand back to find a small cut, a bead of blood welling up. In my fascination, I'd accidentally caught my finger on a sharp edge of the dollhouse. As I watched, a drop of blood fell, landing on the miniature carpet of the parlor. The moment it touched the fabric, the whispers stopped. An eerie silence fell over the room. Then slowly, impossibly, the dollhouse began to grow. Or was I shrinking? The room spun around me, the furniture growing to enormous proportions. I felt a sensation of falling, and suddenly I was standing in the parlor of the dollhouse, looking up at my own shocked face peering in through the window. Panic seized me. I ran to the window, pounding on the glass, screaming for help. But my voice came out as nothing more than a whisper, lost in the vastness of the now giant room beyond. "Welcome home, Emily," a voice said behind me. I turned to see the lady in the blue dress, now my size, smiling at me, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was predatory, triumphant. "What's happening?" I gasped. "What is this place?" The lady's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "This is where we all end up eventually. All the women in your family. Your grandmother resisted for years, but in the end, even she succumbed." A chill ran through me as the implications of her words sank in. "My grandmother? She's here?" The lady nodded, gesturing to a door behind her. "Would you like to see her?" Before I could answer, the door swung open. There, sitting in a rocking chair, was my grandmother, but not as I remembered her. This version of her was young, perhaps in her 20s, dressed in clothes from another era. "Grandma?" I whispered. She looked up, her eyes widening in recognition and then horror. "Oh, Emily, no, not you too." I ran to her, wrapping my arms around her in a desperate hug. She felt real, solid. This was no dream or hallucination. "What's going on, Grandma? How do we get out of here?" She pulled back, her eyes sad. "We don't, dear. This house, it's been in our family for generations. It takes us one by one. I had hoped by giving it to you, by warning you, you might break the cycle." "But why?" I asked, my mind reeling. "Why us? Why our family?" The lady in the blue dress laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Because your ancestor made a deal, silly girl. A deal for wealth, for power. And this house, This is where she pays the price. Where you all pay the price. I looked around the room, really seeing it for the first time. There were other dolls. No, other women watching us. Some looked resigned, others angry, but all had the same haunted look in their eyes. There has to be a way out, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. We can't just be trapped here forever. My grandmother shook her head. Many have tried, Emily. All have failed. But as she spoke, I noticed something. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, there was a tiny dollhouse, an exact replica of the one I'd inherited. And inside that dollhouse, I could see tiny figures moving. An idea began to form in my mind. If I could shrink to enter this dollhouse, could I shrink again? Could I go deeper? Find the source of this curse? I broke away from my grandmother, running to the mantelpiece. Behind me, I could hear the lady in the blue dress shouting. Could feel the other women trying to grab me. But I was faster. I reached the tiny dollhouse and without hesitation pricked my finger on its sharp roof. A drop of blood fell, landing on its miniature lawn. The world spun again. I felt that sickening sensation of falling, of shrinking. When it stopped, I found myself standing in front of an even smaller dollhouse. I was getting closer. I could feel it. Again and again I repeated the process. Each time the dollhouse grew smaller, the details becoming more intricate, more impossible. And each time I could feel a growing sense of wrongness, of evil. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of shrinking, I reached a dollhouse so small it was barely visible to the naked eye. But I knew somehow that this was it, the source of the curse. With a deep breath, I pricked my finger one last time. The world exploded into light and sound. I was falling, faster than ever before, tumbling through space and time. I saw flashes of my ancestors, of the woman who had made the original deal. I saw the entity she had bargained with, a thing of shadow and malice. And then suddenly, I was back in my living room, full-sized and gasping for air. The dollhouse sat before me, innocent-looking and still. But now I knew its secret. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed the number my grandmother had left me, the one I was only supposed to use in emergencies. A gruff voice answered on the first ring. Emily, is it time it? I swallowed hard, my eyes never leaving the dollhouse. Yes, I said. It's time. Bring the sage, the salt, and the iron. We're ending this tonight. As I hung up, I could have sworn I heard a tiny scream of rage coming from the dollhouse, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew the truth now, and knowledge was power. Tonight I would free my family from this curse, and tomorrow I would burn every dollhouse I could find. Because now I knew, some toys really aren't meant to be played with, and some inheritances are better left unclaimed.